The main character was in the desert. She was scared she would never have thought that she would meet her death under the scorching sun in a completely unfamiliar place far from home. The beauty tries to back away, but nothing works. The man standing opposite pointed a blade at her. He asked if there was anything to say in the end. Her whole body tensed up. The brunette closed her eyes, hoping that she would now wake up in her warm bed at home, where everything was good. She thought that what was happening was unfair. There was an empire called Cromwell, which was nicknamed the ruler of the North. In that place the main character lived in luxury. She never dared to deny herself anything. The girl's home was a huge, wonderfully designed estate. She always wore beautiful dresses and dazzling jewelry. Despite everything available, the lady never cared about all this. The brunette had her own dreams, which were a little different from the simple ones. Most of all, the heroine wanted to explore the world in which she was born. The beauty never sat at home. Her desire constantly moved forward. Every time discovering a new location, the girl realized that her soul was trembling again. The travels began spontaneously, and after only her first trip, the woman managed to visit everywhere from the prehistoric places of the north to the fen settlements in Siberia. The main character gradually moved from one city to another. Without noticing it, she visited all parts of the northern continent. There was the southern part of the empire left. The brunette thought it necessary to go there too. She set off to cross the desert to get to Croatia, one of the countries. It seemed that dreams would come true, because there were not many places left after which a lady could proudly consider that she had traveled around the world, but everything turned out differently than planned. The woman wandered through the desert for more than a week, looking at the map over and over again, but still not understanding what was wrong. There was nothing but sand. All around it was easy to get confused. The brunette was gradually losing hope of getting out and regretted going into the desert. And as the icing on the cake, she had run out of all her water. When the girl was ready to cry from hopelessness, she saw people in the distance almost immediately. She rushed forward, screaming. To miss potential help would be a deadly step. The brunette hoped that she wasn't imagining things, and when she found herself a step away from the small group, she was happy. It took her a few minutes to get her breathing back in order. The girl was just trying to ask for advice. She thought that everything would be fine. Smiling, she asked to tell her the way to Croatia, where she was heading. The beauty was frightened when she realized that her situation seemed to have worsened. The brunette was being stabbed with a sword. It seemed that the man had enemies in that city, and he didn't even want to talk about it. The blonde asked if the stranger had anything to say for the last time. She didn't even have time to open her mouth, still thinking that what was happening was unfair. The young man swung to take her life. I had to scream, straining my voice. The woman didn't even have time to say anything, so she asked to stop. Even so, the hero didn't want to listen, and took what was said as the last words. The heroine realized that it seemed that there would be even more problems if she did not choose the right strategy for behavior. Her whole life flashed before her eyes. The beauty would never want to die in the middle of the desert at the hands of a man she didn't even know. And without noticing it, the lady dodged at the last moment. Exhaling, the woman wanted to calm down, but the realization came to her again that she had almost been stabbed. A loud voice began to scream, accusing the young man of deciding to swing the sword without warning. The brunette didn't see any logic in what was happening. The blonde raised an eyebrow. He didn't think that there needed to be any rules for killing people. As far as he knew, one person always survives, and the other dies. To answer the words, the main character concentrated on the man's eyes. She had never seen such bright pupils before. They reminded her of the scorching summer sun. The blonde distracted her from her thoughts. For some reason, he began to approach. She had to shrink from fear, because the unpredictable stranger could try to kill her again. Bending over, the hero stared at the beauty. A deathly silence fell, and his palm touched her chin. The girl blushed, thinking that her appearance had an effect on the young man. The man exhaled, letting out a light laugh, and noticing that the woman was definitely not a beauty, the heroine immediately realized that she was overwhelmed by a wave of anger at the young man standing in front of her. The stranger wanted to kill the girl immediately, but something made him change his mind. Grinning, he offered to thank her for saving her life. It seemed that everything was over. The heroine thought that she had died, but opening her eyes, she felt that she was very hot. She did not quite understand where she was, and this made her even more confused. The girl was very thirsty. A guard entered the room and poured a bucket of liquid on her head. His voice was caustic, full of mockery. Soon the lady would have to say, "Thank you." She would not last long under the scorching sun. The brunette did not react as expected. Thanks to the invigorating shower, she finally came to her senses. It seemed that her head was no longer filled with fog. The beauty understood where she was and what was happening to her. The prison in which she was located was built in the center of the city where the sun was hottest. Judging by the way the knights treat the prisoners and the way the people outside are dressed, the lady is in Pision. Cromwell's homeland is located on the northern continent, and the king of the south is a large state that occupies most of the territory. Pision had a long-standing feud with the city where the main character comes from, and the girl wanted to avoid this place when she went on trips to the southern continent. No one could predict that the lady would get lost and be dragged to the main prison of the enemy country. The prison was built to torture prisoners with wild heat. The brunette was not accustomed to the warm climate, and therefore would soon find herself in a critical situation again. She realized almost immediately that in order to survive, she would have to run away as quickly as possible. Staying in Pision was almost tantamount to death. The girl carefully got out. It was not a problem for her. She hoped to get lost in the crowd, but then she came across those same scarlet eyes. She felt uneasy. In fact, the main character has a different appearance. She inherited her mother's beauty and silvery moonlight-like hair. The woman always wanted the little girl to grow up and become an elegant lady. Every time the girl ran away from home, she got very angry and locked her in the room. The blonde was not one of those who were so easy to lock up. She never just sat with her hands folded. At first, it was unpleasant to realize that there was no way out. But over time, the lady learned to open locks. Now the heroine could thank her mother because she easily managed to open the exit from the dungeon in which an unsurpassed master of escape was literally raised. Constant confinement and regular escapes over the years made the girl stronger, which was very helpful in traveling. Without sitting still, the beauty improved. During her imprisonment, the heroine trained with great diligence and also studied hundreds of escape methods. Now the brunette found herself on the streets of an unfamiliar city. She looked around. Prison was definitely no place for a beauty like her. The girl rushed forward between the houses. She understood that if she didn't want to attract attention, she would first have to dress in the local style. Turning the corner, the beauty looked around. The women there hid their faces so as not to seduce men. The tradition seemed ridiculous to the heroine, but it could come in handy while on the run. After changing clothes, Asina got to the main street. She was able to read something about Pision from books every time she was interested in looking at the pictures with information. The city was described as a beautiful and strong state built on the sands. Of course, the girl wanted to visit this place one day, even though it was Cromwell's enemy. Of course, the lady did not know that she would be seized against her will and dragged to Pision. But still, the beauty had too many thoughts about this. She was in anticipation. There was hot air around sandy buildings and people from a completely different nation. The girl's eyes shone with joy because the city turned out to be even more amazing than in the books. The brunette seemed to be in another world. Everything seemed unreal. She was again convinced that she loved to travel, unable to restrain herself. The woman jumped up, screaming with joy. The people around looked intently at the stranger, lowering their robe a little lower. The woman lowered her head. She got too carried away, realizing that she needed to be more careful. Otherwise, she would go to jail again. Asina didn't have a particular strategy, so she had to figure out what to do as she went along. The brunette decided to try to find a place to stay for the night, but first she had to eat something because her stomach had started to rumble. Lisi found a food stall in literally 10 minutes. Her mouth started to water from the sight of juicy meat and vegetables. She thanked him for the treat and was about to start. Turning around, she couldn't help herself and accidentally dropped the piece. She couldn't believe her eyes because she saw a familiar figure in the distance. The man turned around, and at that moment, the maiden met her eyes with scarlet pupils. This man looked crazy, especially at that moment when he realized that he had met a captive. The brunette already wanted to scream, but decided to calm down. There were a lot of people around. Her face was covered. For some reason, she became confident that she was not known. Asina was about to run away, but she felt a strange feeling. Heavy steps were heard. the beauty froze in place. Her legs turned to stone. A few moments later, a blond man appeared next to de Velden. The woman realized that she was finished only when she again met the mad gaze directed straight at her. The young man grabbed the lady by the waist, pulling her closer to him. He noticed that the girl had escaped from the cell, just like a rat deciding to deceive. The blonde sternly ordered her to tell how Asina managed to escape. The woman swallowed the lump in her throat and was about to answer something, but she was interrupted. A loud scream was heard, several men appeared behind them, and the heroine was handed over to them. Shad declared that he was going back. He had nothing more to do in the city center. Before leaving, the young man again warned the stranger that she had better not anger him. The thoughts in her head were mixed up. The girl did not understand what they were going to do with hers. The maiden hoped that she would not be killed, but in the end, no one gave any guarantees. The body was dragged towards a castle that had never been seen before. Shad went to the main hall, followed by an assistant, who clarified that the girl had apparently escaped from prison. It seemed to him in the desert that she did not look like a local. Umar thought about it, but almost immediately suggested using the brunette to achieve his own goals. The blonde asked again, because he didn't quite get the logic. There was nothing surprising in saying this. The lady was acting boldly, but her speech and appearance were unusual, as was the energy emanating from her. Perhaps she was the daughter of some aristocrat from the northern continent. Shad wasn't sure, but his instinct told him that this was indeed the case, and that the girl would need to be checked to ensure her origin. Since the northerner herself arrived in the desert, the ruler of the south had an excellent chance. He could try to extract information about Cromwell from her. Umar wanted to hope that they would be able to find out what relations the northern capital had with Kratia. Shad smiled. He nodded because some brilliant idea came to his mind. The young man smiled, as if he had been nurturing the idea in his head for a long time. He was going to send that woman to his harem, and this was the best option for him. At the castle, Milady was met by a maid she politely asked to follow her. Asina did not understand, but still nodded in agreement. On the way to the room, she looked around, trying to find a clue about what kind of place this was. Inside the room, the lady was met by 3 more women, who obligingly bowed their heads as soon as they saw the lady. One of them immediately grabbed de Velden by the clothes and pulled her towards herself. The brunette screamed to be left alone, but it seemed the maids didn't care much about the objections. 5 minutes later, the clothes like the bag were lying on the floor, and the beauty was being dragged forward. Asina was pushed into a huge bathtub, which was in a separate room. Her face twisted because she had not received any warnings about what would happen. Still, the heroine could not complain. After all, she was initially grabbed and dragged by force into the dungeon. Half an hour later, the girl was pulled out of the water, asked to put on the prepared outfit. Noticing what exactly was offered to her, Asina froze in horror. Asking again if it was really wearable, the gentleman was sitting in the main hall, waiting for a meeting. The stranger popped up in her thoughts again. The bright image was distracted by an assistant who had just arrived at the estate. He could not help but notice that the gentleman was clearly pleased with something, but it was difficult to understand what exactly it was. The blonde smiled with the corner of his lips and nodded. After all, he managed to catch the cat in a cage, and now he knows that he will be able to find out as much information as possible. They managed to change the aristocrat's clothes, but of course she did not stop openly showing her indignation. She could not believe that women wore clothes in which their entire stomachs were exposed. Lisi exhaled in irritation. She dressed up in the outfit voluntarily, simply because otherwise the maids would have certainly knocked her out and then done everything against her will. The situation was not easy, but it progressively worsened when the woman realized that she did not have her things with her. Her bag was stolen, along with old clothes, and left in another room. In a split second, regrets came to mind. In the bag, there remained a map, money, other things for the road, and even portraits of the handsome men from Cromwell, which she treasured so much. The worst thing is that the lady's diary was left in the bag. She understood that, without it, she would not be able to do anything, only with the help of papers in the book. Could the lady usually confirm her identity while traveling? The brunette wanted to cry. She did not understand how she was supposed to find her things in the huge castle. The only joy was that the most important item remained on her. There were enchanted earrings in her ears. With the help of the decoration, the scarlet eyes and silver hair were dyed in brown tones, Thanks to the earrings, the woman could travel without revealing her identity. The lady was distracted from her thoughts. One of the maids led the lady forward, along the corridor, pointing to a beautiful door that hid the unknown behind it. Asina felt dizzy. She certainly didn't like what was happening. There were too many doubts inside. The stranger was going to lead the aristocrat further and further. 5 minutes later, Milady found herself in a beautiful room. The assistant helpfully pointed to the bed and described all the objects, declaring that these were new chambers. The brunette was now a member of the harem. At first, the girl looked around, realizing that the room was not bad. Everything was beautifully furnished, and the colors were also pleasing to the eye. Only after a minute did the realization come that it seemed that this really was a harem. The woman turned to the maid, and trying to adjust her voice, asked again to see if she had understood the words correctly. Usually a harem was a place where a man kept several girls and did whatever he wanted with them. In the south, this was a common practice. Asina couldn't bear the news. She sank to the floor in horror. Her travels had led to a dead end. Now it seemed the fear would only grow. Covering her ears with her hands, the brunette wanted to scream. She was shoved into an unfamiliar place, and if you compare, she thought that it would be better to stay in that dungeon in the middle of the city. The realization immediately came to mind. That person with scarlet eyes was probably the one who arranged something like this. While the mistress was complaining, the maid asked to get up, arguing that the floor was still cold. The stranger couldn't understand how Asina could be sad. Joining a harem was a great honor, but it seemed to her that, on the contrary, there was a reason for joy. The brunette finally lost her temper and started screaming, "A man should only have one girlfriend." The aristocrat was dragged to a place where a young man is having fun with several at once. That's not an honor. The beauty did not agree. She was incredibly happy to become Shad's toy. Devilden clenched her teeth. Arguing was still useless. It was like talking to a wall. Exhaling, Asina, nevertheless, thanked Lamesha, sitting down on the bed. Before going into her thoughts, she asked why the room was so quiet. The brunette tried to explain quickly enough. There was only one Ira in the harem, and Lisi became her the beauty. Quietly asked again, the words seemed unreal to her. Shad still had no intention of visiting the ladies' chambers. He was sitting in the main hall when the ruler of Dirhan arrived. The gentleman ordered in a cold voice to let the man in. Jalil bowed his head as soon as he entered. It was an honor for him to meet Raccoon. The blonde did not react right away. He waited for more words to follow, but this did not happen. The first thing the young man asks is what brought the great ruler to his monastery. He says that he heard about Shad's return from the holy oasis of Ishmael in good health and came to greet him. News reached him that a woman had been brought into the harem. He knew that in ancient times, even slaves were accepted into the harem, but he had also heard that the origin of the maiden was unknown. The old man puts moral pressure on him, asking if Raccoon is aware of how surprised he is. He was already beginning to worry that the rumors about his fading mind might be true. The youth squeezed the scarlet fruit tightly, his eyes flashing with an evil light as he asked how Jalil dared to insult his master in such a way. The brunette backed away. He lowered his head in fear. The man's murderous energy was stunning. At this rate, a murder would soon happen. The great man asked for forgiveness. Explaining that he had only expressed his concern, the blonde sternly declared that he did not need such a thing and forced Dirhan to leave. There was silence in the room. The brunette tossed and turned on the bed, not understanding what she would need to do to achieve freedom. Asina sadly admitted to herself that she was on the brink of death. She just wanted to see the desert. It was not fair at all. The lady could no longer complain about her fate. She realized that she needed to pull herself together. Simply sitting on her hands was not her thing. The northerner knew that she had to choose the best path to get out, because she could not become the wife of some peasant. The girl remembers her grand escape from the Fen prison. Then she didn't even bat an eyelid. There were terrible guards there. From such an open place as the estate in Pizian, the heroine should be able to get out without difficulty. But not everything is so smooth. The lady lost her things. The girl was not stupid, so she understood that, even if she managed to escape, she would not survive without her bag. The diary that remained there was the most important part. There were also problems with the earrings. The camouflage spell on them certainly doesn't last forever. Sometimes you need to remove the camouflage and let them rest. According to the lady's calculations, the decoration will last for about another week, which means that there are 7 days left to escape. The beauty decided to explore the layout and study the escape routes. Under the bright moon, the girl climbed out the window. She could not help but notice that in Pisan, the glow was white, while in the north it was slightly yellowish. The brunette looked around. She realized that the residence was huge. It was as if it were the size of a palace. All the buildings were systematically connected. The estate was difficult to leave and difficult to get to. Asana was in the farthest part of the buildings. Escaping would be more difficult than she expected. The beauty sincerely did not understand why a stranger lived in such a place. First, she needed to understand what the nearest building was intended for. Having carefully landed away from the guards, the brunette walked forward. There was no one around, but she was still interested in that very building with the blue roof. Judging by the luxurious decor, the estate belonged to someone influential. The maiden decided not to worry about it for now, and went to check the garden. Of course, it was lucky that the lady managed to stop in time, so that she wouldn't be noticed. There was someone in the pond, which was not that far away. Peering out from behind the bushes, Asina wondered what the young man was doing so late at night, all alone. She didn't immediately understand who was standing there. Her eyes widened in horror when the beauty realized that the mentally ill man who had fished her out of the desert was in the water. The girl tried to restrain herself from screaming, and the girl didn't want to be seen. She carefully turned over and crawled away. The fear still lodged in her head and wouldn't go away. It seemed to the beauty that she would soon run away. But then a menacing voice was heard, and the blonde noticed that the stranger was really behaving like a rat. It was not possible to explain because the young man threw the woman straight into the water, showing that for now only he had the leading positions. He wanted to know why she was constantly spying on people, as if she were a spy. The brunette decided to attack, first asking who Shad was. He was the one who stole the girl. Grinning, the stranger said that, in Pisan, he can do whatever he wants. The woman did not believe it, so she answered with the same energy. She assumed that in front of her was God or a ruler, but she certainly did not expect to hear that the blonde was the king of the state. The man thought that he would finally be listened to, so he introduced himself as Shad Zain Behdad. The girl's voice began to tremble, because in front of her was the living god Pisan. The acquaintance was pleased that the lady knew the meaning of the word Ra-kun. Without giving the heroine time to come to her senses, Behdad grabbed her in his arms and threw her over his shoulder, and immediately the lady's squeals could be heard demanding that she be lowered to the ground. Waving her arms, she asked how one could treat such a beautiful creature so rudely. She did not understand where Ra-kun was dragging her. The young man threw the woman onto a bed in a closed room and began interrogating her, asking if the lady was a spy for Cromwell. The girl understood that now her task was to prove at any cost that she was pure, as were her intentions. She explained that, although she came from the northern continent, she was not a spy. Asina went to Croatia only for the excursion. Looking with a pitiful look, the brunette seemed to be begging for them to believe her. The hero had no choice but to nod reservedly. He decided to see where this situation would lead him. The man asked if the lady had decided to seduce him. She raised an eyebrow in displeasure, asking what exactly he meant. The young man stared as if he had noticed something. The girl didn't immediately realize that the eyes were focused on her wet clothes. It didn't exactly embarrass her, but it did make her very angry. The first reaction failed because the body was thrown onto the bed. The girl declared that she was beautiful, so she shouldn't be surprised by what was happening. The lady could agree, but she remembers very well how she was ridiculed. She asks to move away from her and tries to back away. The young man is about to add something else to what has been said. He cannot determine whether Asina is beautiful, but her eyes are captivating. The blonde, without thinking twice, leaned even closer and kissed the beauty sharply. The girl didn't know how to react to this. Everything was mixed up. The hands squeezed the woman's wrists tightly, and she became afraid, because if she did nothing, it would only get worse. Still gathering her courage, the brunette screams at the top of her lungs and pushes the young man away. She doesn't want to be kissed by force. Moving away, the blonde smiling his exemplary mocking smile greets the stranger in the harem for him. What is happening is not a problem. Morning came. The lady herself did not remember how she fell asleep. When she opened her eyes, she was surprised because there was a woman in front of her. The green-eyed girl introduced herself as Nur. She explained that she would become the mistress's personal servant. It was an honor for her to meet Ira personally. The brunette nodded and greeted back. Perhaps Shad had assigned the girl only to keep an eye on Asuna, since she was wandering around the estate at night. Nur grabbed the girl by the hand and noticed that her skin color was very pale. Many already realized that the girl was not from Pizian. The brunette helpfully explained what she was asked about. Aira. That's what they call Kun's woman, and Asina became a noble lady who has the right to serve Shad. The girl wanted to scream because everything that was happening seemed unreal. Her hand was shaking, but getting up, she asked to ask one more question. The maid asked not to address her respectfully, in order to simplify everything many times over. The brunette wanted to clarify whether Nur would really accompany her everywhere and always. A 24-hour tale when the heroine wanted to develop an escape plan would be very inappropriate. The girl was calmed down. She was called to help if she bothers. You can always call her away. When the tea was poured, the maid promised that everything would be fine and left the room. There was a deathly silence. The lady felt a lump in her throat. Asina was not ready to believe that she was now a woman of Raccoon, unlike Cromwell, where everyone believes in the ethereal goddess Lemesha. In Pizian, the ruler of the country is God. According to legend, it is God who brings water to the dry, sandy desert, which nourishes life in the local flora. And his name is Kun. In a country in the south, such a title is very important. The ruler is in charge of everything. From the economy and politics to the culture of the country, everything revolves around him. The king is revered as a god, although perhaps this is wrong, but they have a different situation. The brunette wants to scream. She did not know that in the desert she met Raccoon himself. For some reason, my consciousness recalled the moment when the two kissed the face. Slightly flushed, the woman was still angry because the man did not have the right to do whatever he wanted. The hero had no idea that he had also stolen the lady's first kiss. Of course, Asina did not know how it happened, but in the end, the situation was not very favorable. There was no more strength to hold back, so the lady began to scream, cursing Raccoon. One day, he would regret what he did. Shad was informed that after all the research, no changes were noticed in Jahid's actions. Presumably, he is not aware that everyone in the castle knows about his affairs. The blonde orders to leave the ruler alone. He is interested in how far his insolence will lead. Umar nodded. He cannot argue with the head. The man standing behind quietly asked the young man about the woman he had recently brought into the harem. The assistant still did not understand who she was. Umar quietly started a conversation to clarify all the details. In his humble opinion, bringing a lady into the harem was an extremely hasty decision. The young man saw no point in playing around with the situation. He started with the wrong words, and therefore accidentally mentioned the past, what happened once in the harems. The brunette stepped forward, noticing that his friend was right about something. The Grand Vizier would not like what was happening. He wanted his daughters to be in the harem. Shad had 6 other high-ranking officials to consider, as well as 48 others, all of whom would fight to push through their relatives. Instead of agreeing, the blonde took what was said too directly. He declared that he wanted to know a little more about his chosen one and ordered her to be brought to the main hall. Ira was informed almost immediately that Raccoon wanted to see her. The girl was eating and therefore did not want to go, but she still had no choice. The two walked down a long corridor. Asina is angry because she wanted to calm herself down with at least good food. She did not understand why she needed to see Behdad. The brunette didn't consider herself anything like a dog, so she didn't want to run at every call. Noor's voice distracted him from his thoughts, saying that they had arrived. The door to the hall opened, revealing a throne on which sat the head of the country. The maid said that she had brought Ira, and then quickly left. The girl felt that things would get worse. Her body was shaking. At first, the girl tried to stop the assistant, but she was not going to stay. Asina was afraid to find out what they would do to her this time. There is silence in the room. Again, the beauty has shrunk all over. She understands that, although she is left alone with the man, she does not even dare to look him in the eyes. Smiling Behdad wanted to know how long his acquaintance would avoid him. He wanted to know how the night in the harem went. For the northerner, it all looked like a cruel game, but she was not going to give up either. She said that she did not avoid his gaze, but simply prepared herself mentally. Smiling as widely as she could, the brunette explained that her night had been amazing, and to clarify, she also asked Raccoon a question in return. The man nodded. If the girl liked everything in the harem so much, he would gladly allow her to stay there forever, without going home. The king asked the lady what she thought about what he said, trying to contain her anger. The girl laughed slightly to ease the situation. No matter how tempting the offer was, the lady understood that she would have to refuse. The blonde noticed that although the brunette had behaved like a wild cat the previous night, she had become unusually calm. I wanted to know what Asina was planning. Nazir's words made sense. What he said not long ago was reflected on the other side of consciousness. The man leaned over and asked in an angry voice why the lady had gone to Crescia, and she repeated in fear that she wanted to see the sights. Her eyes glow with a fierce light. When the king orders her to be silent, he does not want to hear about excursions. Therefore, if he hears it even once more, he will shut her mouth forever. Every time Shad looks like that, the girl feels like she is in an open palm, and she feels uneasy every time. Among the chaos of feelings, one thing emerges. Intuition tells her that she needs to run away from this person, preferably as far as possible. The heroine will try to justify herself so that they will at least let her into the room. Before this, the maiden had heard that there were wonderful dates in Crescia. She also wanted to see what kind of houses there were in the desert. She wanted to study them as best she could. The brunette had a lot of excuses in stock, but when they actually demanded something from her, she couldn't remember anything. The man asks if it's true that the lady crossed the border just for houses and food. No one in the world would have acted the same way as Asina. She did not know that she would end up in the desert of death. What was said made her a little embarrassed. Raccoon was interrupted by an assistant who announced that the royal secretary had arrived. The brunette turned and noticed the man she had met earlier. The young man with bright blue hair was in the city center when the lady was seized and dragged to the harem. She was happy because she realized that she would be saved. The blonde was very angry. The assistant quietly asked if he should leave initially. Shad himself called him, but perhaps his opinion changed. The red-eyed man waved him off, and instead of driving him away, he introduced Nazir to his era. Turning around, he pointed at the girl and decided to ask her name. She realized that it took the gentleman too long to get around to asking basic information. The servant smiled and greeted the lady. He noticed that, at first, he did not recognize her in such a new outfit in the southern style. The hero noticed that the lady still looked great, which meant that Raccoon must be pleased with this transformation. Asina smiled dazzlingly in response, declaring that everything was logical because she was the most beautiful on the planet. Umar exhaled. He was surprised that the maiden was still able to speak like that in the situation she found herself in. Shad began to be irritated by behavior that he would never have liked. He ordered the lady to be taken away again, wishing to be left alone. Before leading the girl, Nazir nodded. Before that, the king mentioned that it seemed the woman was afraid of him because she did not answer any questions, remaining as closed as possible. The beauty was not someone who could be simply intimidated by conversation. The young man understood that he had to come up with something more interesting. Umar was asked to extract information from the lady, at least bits, in order to put together a picture and understand who she really was. When Amina was taken to the room, she was asked to sit down, and before entering, a cape was thrown over her face, as these are the rules for being around men. The young man sat down to write something he remembered. The mention that the girl was not from Cromwell. He wanted to know where she came from what city. Without a second thought, the lady quickly named the city she was from, Sigrin, a tiny kingdom on the southeastern border of Cromwell. Nazir had no idea something so small existed, but nodded. The maiden decided to ask about the Desert of Death, as is known. Many travelers died in those sands, and many exiled clans died in Jared. Blue-Eyed continued, "There are rumors that the desert is cursed." The young man realized that the lady is skilled, so he decided to test her, asking if she knew that Crescia and Piscian were feuding. The girl pretended that she was not informed. She knew that Crescia was taken over by people who were against the founding of the southern city, but that was all. Relations between the countries are extremely tense. News about the situation in the south reaches the north. With some delay, the woman finally understood why she was taken for a criminal. The girl regrets that in the desert, she asked King Pizian for directions. She escaped from prison, which made the guards even more wary. Perhaps it was simply worth saying thank you for the fact that the lady was simply thrown behind bars and not killed immediately on sight. Umar wanted to ask one more question. The young man did not understand why the heroine went through the desert, although all the northerners heading to Kratia go by a different route. The northerner was offered to go another way, but she refused. Nazir smiled. He became even more interested because Ira preferred the option that could cost her life. The man wasn't sure if the brunette was lying, but he could tell for sure if the girl's reason for sneaking into the desert was true. The lady began to explain that on the northern continent, the mountains change color every season, and there are carpets of green fields, but they do not have sandy oceans. Nazir was born in Pizian and grew up in the desert, so he never thought about it. He quietly asked what the lady thought when she saw her dream. Nodding, the brunette stated that the desert, in reality, was even more mesmerizing than it seemed. It seemed so magnificent that the heroine didn't even mind melting under the scorching sun. The princess was surprised when she learned that such a beautiful place was called the Desert of Death. Umar realized that the woman was not lying. This time, she was telling the truth. It seems to him that the girl is the only one in the world who could call the sands of death beautiful. Her eyes glow with joy. The man did not arrive empty-handed. He held out the bag, asking if the lady recognized this thing. She quietly gasped because she remembered her things inside. Shad personally examined all the items, and now they are ready to return. Everything that does not arouse suspicion, those that seemed questionable, will remain with the master. The lady exhaled. There is nothing to worry about. The diary is the most important item, but it has protective spells, so the thing will be safe. Umar reported that the check was over. The servant would see Ira often, since they now lived in the same residence. The beauty didn't want to arouse suspicion, so she nodded. It would be nice. It was difficult for a lady to stay in one place, especially when it lasted too long. Very soon, Karim was called. He would need to guard the harem for some time, because a girl had finally been placed in it. The man raised an eyebrow, not understanding in what sense this meant he was the tamer of Raccoon, and did not understand why he had to do such a simple job. The warriors of the desert were always strong, because if they wanted to survive in the barren lands, there was no other choice among the warriors. There were tamers, and Karim was the most skilled of them all. He was angry because it seemed like they were talking about that foreigner that Shad had brought. Umar exhaled. It seemed like the news wasn't the best. The brunette asked who the northerner was. She was obviously important, since a tamer was sent to guard her. Too many things about her seemed suspicious. The lady's reason for coming to Pizian is unclear, and her belongings raise questions. A woman traveling alone is already a rather strange phenomenon. Karim asked why, if the girl was so alarming, they wouldn't just kill her. In the opinion of Raccoon's assistant, the lady didn't look like a spy. She had some other goal. Nazir is not the only one who turns to the Tamer with a request, because this is also an order from Shad. There is a reason why the master took her into the harem. It is impossible to disobey him. The lady finally arrived back in her chambers. She immediately fell onto the bed and sighed tiredly, remembering the conversation that had happened recently. Nazir seemed good, but the interesting thing is whether the man believed the heroine's words. The brunette realized that even though she had told the truth about being a traveler, things could have turned out differently. Given her recent antics, she wouldn't be surprised if she was still perceived as a spy. Cromwell and Krakia are allies, and both states are enemies of Pizian. The girl realized that she was in a very precarious position. If the heroine's identity is revealed after she admitted that she is heading to Kratia, the family could be in big trouble, as well as the entire country. Overall, it wasn't all that bad. The lady understood that her parents wouldn't fall apart because of some conflict, but still there were concerns. The father always supported his daughter's zeal for travel, and the mother, although strict, loves the little girl very much. They don't need any extra problems. Asina was completely immersed in her thoughts. Until Noor's voice was heard, the maid said that the tamer had arrived, who would be the guard. The woman seemed to remember that the man was Raccoon's bodyguard, so she was surprised when the young man quickly entered the room. His steps were confident. Approaching the bed, the brunette looked angrily at the girl he wanted to ask why a worthless person like her ended up in the harem. Noor, standing near the entrance, watched. She expected such a reaction from the lady, so she was not surprised. Foreigners are rarely greeted with open arms. In the situation that had arisen, the heroine decided to be as polite as possible. She greeted, asking for forgiveness for not having time to cover her face. The princess has not yet had time to get used to the local etiquette, but most likely everything will be better very soon. Karim examined the body of the beauty. He was told that she had escaped from prison. It seemed that she should have been more strongly built. He was amazed that a frail girl had escaped from Jahannam. The brunette realized that he had made a mistake. He shouldn't have looked so intently at the young woman. He apologized for being rude and introduced himself. Smiling warmly again, the lady nodded. She would like to be called by her first name and not Ira, as was proper. The young man did not answer, but changed the subject. He was going to constantly stand guard behind the walls of the harem, and if anything was needed, he could be called. The beauty nodded, but as soon as the door closed, she drooped. She already had Noor. But now Sihad added another overseer. The hopes for a simple escape were gradually fading. Her soul was uneasy, so the lady decided to go for a walk. She also needed to see the location of the nearest buildings. A familiar voice was heard from behind, asking how far the lady was going. Turning around, the brunette met scarlet eyes. De Velden had no doubt that this particular person would be there. She didn't want to see him, but that's exactly how it turned out. The brunette stepped back, asking him to stop looking at her like that. Now the lady knows that she looks suspicious, but it's already clear to her that she won't be able to distance herself from this. The man doesn't understand why he needs a reason to come to his own harem. The girl explained that she meant something else. Chuckling, the blonde said that he wanted to see the lady. The woman began to stutter, asking if Raccoon's head was baked. You can't get bored with a woman even for a minute. Usually, only two emotions are visible in the eyes of those who look at the gentleman. The woman does not feel either fear or awe. The way the maiden looks without a drop of doubt is perhaps even striking, lowering the strand of hair that the young man held in his hands. He asked if Ira was comfortable in the harem. The stranger intrigues the guy. He came closer, putting his hand on the beauty's chin. Perhaps she would like to leave, but such an opportunity was not presented. Stepping back, the lady asked how long Raccoon would stand over her. She still felt uncomfortable. There were many thoughts in her head, but the main thing was that she wanted to run away. The man had long since realized that Asina was uncomfortable, simply because he was the one next to her, because he was a woman, or because of what had happened between them not long ago. That day, the young man was simply testing the girl, so he kissed her, but it seemed she had no experience in relationships at all. The girl quietly said that if she had known who was in front of her, she would not have asked for directions back then in the desert. The blonde recalled how the picture looked. From the outside, a woman moving the desert of death asked how to go to an enemy state. This was alarming. The hero was interested in something else. He does not understand how the stranger managed to get out of Jahannam. It is rare to escape from there. The traveler will not be able to say that the escape was also a coincidence, because this time the situation is completely different. The locks were very simple, but in order to tell the truth, the woman stated that the door was open. Raccoon warned that next time, it would be better to think about the consequences before spouting nonsense. The beauty did not understand what she needed to do to see freedom again. The blonde asked her to prove her innocence. Then he would grant her the right to choose. The brunette thought about the conversation. While Noor helped her get ready, she didn't understand how to find evidence. It would be much easier to just run away. After the conversation, the king went with the woman and spent the whole night in the harem. The girl could not close her eyes because of the situation that reigned there. The girl went for a walk. She finally realized that her chambers were located around the royal palace. Noor was silent the whole time, until she was asked a question. Lysaea did not understand why the harem was so big. As a rule, only Kuna women should live there. The maid explained everything. The palace harem is a home, not only for those loved by the master, but also for little girls left without a family. That's why the place is so spacious. The maiden was afraid that the ruler made the beauties his concubines when they grew up. Such cases also happened, but usually the king married them off to high-ranking officials of Piziente. There are 6 great Taurus rights and 48 heads in the state. Kun gives them the order to marry women from his harem in order to prevent the strengthening of their power through external marriage. Asina asked If there was a person she should be wary of, the most dangerous person was already holding a grudge against her. But if possible, she would not like to annoy anyone else. Noor thought for a second after Shad. The most influential character is the Grand Vizier. His name is Gedik. The old man always came once every 100 years, asking for forgiveness for his behavior, and declaring that it was only because he had a lot of work to do. This time, the man suggested throwing a feast in honor of the master's return. A pilgrimage to the holy oasis of Ismail is an extremely risky undertaking after all. Whenever Kun leaves, the people of Pijian begin a fast in hopes of his safe return, praying that he will not encounter danger in the desert and leave the country forever. As soon as the master returns back, a week-long feast is held in his honor, so that the people rejoice, and the beloved god always gives his approval for this. With his scarlet eyes sparkling, the young man asks if there are any other reasons to have a joyful feast. Gedik assured that he was not looking for any other excuses. Not to continue the meaningless conversation, the young man thanked him. He would look forward to the next feast. The man was about to send the guest away, but he asked him to humbly offer his daughter. At first it was unclear what the conversation was leading to. Jakia was a beauty. Shad had previously said that he was not interested in women and had refused her, but it seemed that his opinion had changed because a stranger had appeared in the harem. The blonde does not show his emotions. What is happening disgusts him. Gedik does not even try to hide the fact that he carefully collected information. Good intentions are always good, but the young man will not let anyone near him anymore. The words made the ruler freeze. He quietly asked what this was supposed to mean. They tried to stop Rakun to talk a little more, but just one look made Gedik step back and forget about his desires. The lady was walking in the garden, but she couldn't get rid of the gaze that was boring into her back. The servant hides his presence so that an ordinary person wouldn't notice him, but Asina knows that he is somewhere in the bushes. The girl decided to expose Karim, but to do it very carefully, without showing that she had been able to expose him. Following forward, the woman looked around accidentally, bumping into the brunette. She was surprised, not understanding what he had forgotten in the harem, outside of which he should be. The man was following the woman because he suspected her of spying. The girl realized that it was strange for the hero to realize that he was caught right in the middle of the process. Asina decided to joke, smiling. She said that after she watched for a while, she realized that the Tamir was quite handsome. With the data that the young man has, he must be liked by women. The lady was just going to sit on his ears until he got tired of it. The brunette lowered his hand onto the sword. The girl immediately began asking questions, and asking to touch the thing, the interlocutor was completely lost. Fighting with other warriors suited him perfectly, but conversations with ladies never came easy to him. The heroine continued asking questions that had no answers. She was interested in literally everything she was confident of, victory, until a voice was heard. Shad appeared, and immediately an unpleasant atmosphere hung in the air. Umar also appeared behind. While the master mockingly asked if Asina liked the Tamir, the assistant asked with just one look, not to provoke. The girl smiled. All ladies dream of a knight in golden armor. Besides, Karim is extremely handsome. The blonde nodded, intending to press until the very end. Lysaea asked if Rakun really had come, only to ask what her taste in men was. The young man exhaled and called Nazir. He was the one who wanted to talk. He had several questions about the northern continent that only my lady could answer. The girl smiled. She wouldn't answer just like that. Umar froze in surprise because he didn't expect something like that, which made him feel uneasy. It seems that they took the bait. The girl collected her thoughts and then said that she agreed to the exchange. She needed her bag back. Nazir was surprised. He asked why the brunette was so desperately trying to get her things back. There must be something special there. Shad heard that a locking spell was placed on her. The beauty did not understand what to say, but in the end, she shouted the simplest answer. There was underwear in the bag. The girl cast a spell so that no one could get into it. The blonde began to laugh. Lisi is really an unpredictable person. Nodding towards the servant, the gentleman ordered to bring the things back so that the lady could take them. Asina was taken into the garden so that she could rest a little, and a plate of dates was prepared for her to eat. As soon as the girl saw the food, she immediately offered to answer all the questions about the north. The brunette was going to be asked directly about Cromwell. Umar was ready to listen to everything the lady could tell, but for a second, she thought, and shyly lowered her eyes to the table, not understanding what else to say. Lisi decided to make do with well-known facts. She figured out how to properly bypass the ambush without seeming strange. In the end, the heroine told Nazir about the nature, religion, and politics of her country. She described Cromwell as a blooming and green place with wonderful people. The girl was proud of her country from birth and loved it even more when she began to travel. Homeland is always the most important place. There are two influential families in Cromwell, known internally as the Cardians, a family of swordsmen, and the Estati, a family of scholars. Under the protection of the two clans, the royal family became invulnerable, and no one dared to challenge its authority. The state policy is in a particularly stable position. Throughout the history of the empire, there was not a single uprising. Nazir listened to the end and nodded, because he received a lot of fascinating information. The man smiled. In his opinion, the lady knew too much. The girl began to smile nervously and make excuses. She was sure that any northerner she met would have told the guy the same thing. Umar turned away, but he couldn't say anything else. The young man hoped that next time he would be told even more information. The young man explained quite normally, but the woman was indignant because she wanted to take her bag back, and they promised to return the things as soon as all the questions were answered. When night fell, Lisi went outside looking at the moon. She understood that she was back to where she started. The security in the castle was still weak. The patrol and shift change times are not changing. The girl only needs to remember the layout, and it will be easier than pie to escape. There is still one problem left: to get to Surt after the escape. The brunette had no choice but to think about it later. The girl was going to go down again to understand where she should go. At the last moment, the lady felt that someone was watching her. It was strange because due to the height, the heroine could not be noticed. All this seemed like something unreal. The gentleman standing to the side with the vizier turned around and was asked what was wrong. It seemed to the man that there was some stranger in the distance. The hero thought that he simply noticed a small animal. The girl managed to hide behind the wall because she did not want to be seen. As soon as the maiden returned back to the estate, she decided to take a bath exhaling. She was glad that she still did not catch anyone's eye. Unnecessary problems were not needed. The brunette was still worried because recently she could have been noticed on the street, even if only for a second. She had a bad feeling. King Pisyan had always been a force of power, but that man's gaze made him feel like he was in a hopeless situation, as if a snake had wrapped around his body. The woman sincerely hopes that she will never meet the man again. The beauty accidentally noticed in the reflection of the water that her earrings had changed color. The girl understood that there was little mana left in the decoration, but she did not think that they would discharge so quickly. There was no choice. The lady decided to remove the spell for a short time and do this at least once every few days. When the heroine came out of the bathroom, Noor sat her on the table and began to comb her hair. She hoped that the magic would last longer, but in the end, she had to remove some of the spell from her eyes. The maid did not notice the changes. The heroine decided that there would be no problems. The brunette reminded the mistress that Ra-kun was waiting for her. He asked her to appear as early as possible. The man arrived in the room himself. He began to walk quickly, as if there were treasures hidden in the room. The young man grinned. He did not need a reason to see his beloved concubine. Lisi snorted and turned around to leave. The guy had already noticed that she had noticeably long hair during travels. The hair got in the way, and the lady even wanted to cut it. Instead of doing as she saw fit, the lady left it long, because she didn't want the family to have a stroke. Everyone in the family believed that an aristocrat should have long hair. Ra-kun realized that the woman had never mentioned whether she had brothers or sisters. The girl said that she was an only child, but she had cousins. The young man nodded. Silence fell in the room. He finally asked about the woman's name. He wanted to know if this was her real name. Not long ago, Baedid realized that he still didn't know much about the girl, but in the worst case, everything was still ahead. The girl laughed. She wasn't going to lie about her name. Asina is not a hypocrite or a melancholic by nature. She says that her father and his entire family spent about 3 months choosing a name for their daughter. In ancient Sinani, Asina is light and blessing. Everything is visible at first glance. The girl clearly grew up in the love and care that everyone around her gave her. Now, Behdad wants to know even more about the lady. He wants to know why the girl who grew up in a loving family left her home and chose such a thorny path. The girl pushed the man's hand away and exhaled with a bit of discontent. She didn't understand why the gentleman always sat at home. The young man asked again, only after that it became clear that apparently the address was too insolent for a king. The girl decided to clarify how to address the gentleman correctly. Sihad seemed the most appropriate, but she did not understand what it meant. Sihad is the name of God. Asina would like to understand what is the correct name. The real name is Behdad, but this is also incorrect, so the lady asks if she can call him Behi. The blonde smiled. He thought that this address sounded very good. The brunette froze because it was the first time she saw something so wonderful. Coming to her senses, Asina turned away, not understanding where Behi had so many questions from Raccoon, had more important things to do than interrogate his concubine. The young man remained unperturbed, thinking that the thing was that he liked the lady. The girl lowered her head. She did not believe that it was true. He was talking about something that could not be. Coming up from behind, Raccoon grabbed the girl by the hand and pulled her towards him, asking what makes her think that this cannot be. Without giving her time to come to her senses, the hero kisses her. The beauty does not understand what came over the man. Today, he behaved in a distinctive way. Realizing that it was dangerous, the lady began to think about how to escape. Before the lady did anything, the young man himself stepped back. Allowing her to relax for a moment, the hero almost lost control. He noticed that the lady was inexperienced in everything that concerns men. The girl doesn't understand what the difference is, but for Raccoon, it matters. If Asina understood what to do, he would have gone further than a simple kiss on the lips. Unable to bear it, the heroine screams, asking why they are treating her like this. A calm voice explains, "I told you that I liked you." Of course, even so, the blonde didn't force him to do anything, and even pretended not to notice how the color of his eyes had changed. The girl turned away in panic, but someone grabbed her by the chin. It seemed to her that the color had not changed so much, and that it would never be noticeable unless you looked closely. Asina walked away, as if not understanding what was happening. She needed to look in the mirror in her head. She tried to calm herself down, because maybe the young man was just checking her out. After a second's glance in the mirror, Lisi turned back, her voice filled with reproach, as she asked if the young man's eyesight was failing her, but she hadn't seen the difference. The hero was silent, but he himself understood that he could not help but notice the changes, because he always looks into the eyes. In the last few days, he realized that the woman tenses up every time he is near. It doesn't look like the lady is cheating, but at the same time, she is hiding a lot. The young man wants to allow himself to be led by her tricks, so he pretends that he was wrong. The hero decided to ask another question about why the lady was traveling. She never told him. The girl does not see the point in the question. The world in which she was born is beautiful. It would be stupid to sit in one place until the end of days. The blonde raised an eyebrow. A strange statement, because before he had not even thought about leaving Pizion. The brunette understands that many consider her desires strange. She decided to change the subject and asked when Behi was going to leave. He continues to lie on the bed next to her. The girl doesn't know if she can fall asleep while the person she doesn't like is nearby. She's not going to explain because in her opinion it's stupid. The blonde hugged Asina carefully. It was better to start falling asleep, otherwise they would have to continue where they had stopped not so long ago. In the morning, the girl felt terrible. In her opinion, it was like a new kind of torture because of the man. She could not close her eyes. The girl prefers to walk at night when no one sees her. Asina needs to get ready. If she doesn't look around, she'll have to do it during the day. Otherwise, she'll never find a way out. When the preparations for the new day were completed, the girls went outside. The lady noticed that the people in the palace were fussing more than usual. Noor announced that everyone was preparing for a feast. It would be held in honor of Sihad's return, and a great festival would be held both in the palace and outside it for everyone to attend. The girl was happy. Life seemed to be getting better. The escape might be easier than she initially thought. Crowds of people would flock to the festival, and no one would notice that the lady was missing. In her head, the heroine had already made a rough plan. She would need to take her things and escape on the second day of the feast, and she would have to distract everyone who was watching. Noticing Kareem in the distance, the lady waved her hand at him. The man, noticing the lady, was about to leave but was stopped. The boy has been avoiding the girl since the last incident. She is a real thorn, who constantly pesters him with her stupid questions. The heroine again decided to pester him until the man got tired of following her around. Her plan seemed ideal, even at first glance. Asina asked if Karim liked quiet and good women exhaling. The brunette asked why he was being asked such questions. The girl said that she was interested in him. Of course, the princess is occupied by the tamers, but by law, they should not even talk. A voice was heard from behind that agreed with Karim. The woman with red hair came up from behind to say that Ira really had no right to flirt with others. Shad might find out the truth, and then she would be in trouble. Jakia heard that the man had returned, so she decided to greet him, but ended up running into his concubine. The beauty decided to introduce herself properly. She is the eldest daughter of the Grand Vizier, Gedik Ahmed. She is beautiful, not at all like northern women. Wavy red hair, green eyes, and wonderful facial features. It all looks great for some reason. Karim became very tense in the presence of the girl. Since the lady came to greet the gentleman, she shouldn't have been wandering around just anywhere. Yakia shrugged her shoulders. She noticed that the Tamir was behaving extremely unusually. The girl came from the north, so she may not be familiar with the laws of Pizian, Ayira, is not allowed to see and especially not talk to other men alone. But the couple enjoys their conversation as if they were lovers. The man got angry. All this resembled slander, but the brunette collected her thoughts. No one had looked at her with open jealousy for a long time. It was even refreshing. The girl decided to answer, as she believed the servant seemed tense to her, so it was decided to joke a little to help him relax. It was understandable why it might seem as if a romance had started between them. It was best to pretend that the words had not touched the soul in the least. Jakia clenched her teeth. She realized that all the stories were lies. Shad should not have let such a person into the harem. She did not deserve it. The girl continued to finish off. The interlocutor said that she came to see Behe. Then it would be worth hurrying to his palace instead of talking to Ira. The lady was furious, but still said goodbye, and left. Milady realized that she had made another enemy for herself because she did not like Jakia at all. The woman went to the other girls who were glad to see her. They hoped that she was happy with her stay on the palace grounds. In the past, people always discussed that the lady would definitely become the next Ayira. She didn't have a title, but still everyone treated her as the Princess of Pizian. Virgo had seen many ladies who became arrogant after they managed to suck up to Kun. It was something common. There was still some natural, even noble aura of confidence hovering around the stranger, which I had never encountered before meeting her. Deciding not to think about it anymore, Jakia approached the guard and said that she had come to see Shad, but it turned out that Behdad had another meeting. The green-eyed woman was very surprised. She remembered that she was the first to request an audience. It turned out that the ruler of Sharzavarin was in the hall. Bowing before the ruler, the young man greets his master. He does everything as it should be, but he understands that he is certainly not welcome. The blue-eyed man dares to hope that the journey from the holy oasis was pleasant. The blonde lowered his eyes and thought about something. There are people in the country of Sharza who dare to question the authority of Kun and weave intrigues. This man is their secret patron, managing everything from the shadows. Warrain is the most poisonous snake, controlling everything. From the shadows, the journey went as usual. And this is what Behdad himself says. He asked how things were in Sharz. Because of the constant analysis, a lot of worries probably appeared. Krachia provokes the city from time to time, but this happens constantly about once a year, so there are no problems. Nazir, standing behind the doors, did not understand why the audience was taking so long. Shad pressed the ruler, but he did not flinch. The brunette did not break, so it was easier to let him go, smiling. The blue-eyed man promised that while he was in Pizian, he would come more often. They tried to squeeze information out of the man for an hour, but he doesn't look tired. He is a true member of the famous Sahim family. Unlike the other heads, it is impossible to read him. When the young man came outside, he immediately greeted Nazir. He said that the conversation with the ruler went well. Despite the harsh pilgrimage, the hero was in good health. Blue-eyed knows about the good news. Behdad finally has a woman. No one dares to speak out, because the blonde is still young, but many were worried that his dynasty would come to an end. Umar nodded. In fact, he was disgusted because the young man was again talking nonsense. He knew perfectly well why Shad closed his harem, but it didn't seem to bother him. Umar said that it was time for him to leave. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything about it. The young man nodded. After all, the atmosphere was tense, even on the streets. Pizian was definitely not his city. A king far more formidable than his predecessor, Sakun. It was he who put an end to the bloodbath and took the throne of Pizian. Something had changed in him in the year that they had not seen each other. A year ago, the young man had the face of an old man living out his last days. But now he looked more alive, as if everything was okay for him. Warren found it strange that Ra-Kun had finally broken his own rule and allowed a woman into the harem. Perhaps it had something to do with the new changes. The hero was about to leave, but he ran into the tamer and the girl who were following him. As usual, Kareem's emotions immediately showed on his face. He exhaled and spoke. They weren't close enough to call each other by name. The blue-eyed man nodded. Noticing that the man was still grumbling, he wanted to know who the lady was standing behind was. When it turned out that Ira was nearby, Warren froze. He looked at her, realizing that he was next to an important figure. The lady noticed that she had heard the voice somewhere before. She had no doubt that the man standing in front of her was the one she saw on the streets at night. She could not forget him. In contrast to his voice, the brunette's face is not bad at all. He apologizes for the disrespect and introduces himself as the ruler of Sharza. Something about the man makes the girl wary. She feels uncomfortable. She smiles, promising that she will forgive the rudeness, instead of assuring that everything is fine. Now the young man understands that Ra-Kun did not take a simple lady into his harem. She is not as submissive as the women in Pizian, but it seems that she has a noble upbringing. The girl studied the natural grace, nodding. The brunette thanked her for her generosity. He understood what Shad found in her. After these words, she wanted to know the details. The girl began to tell, as usual, a heartbreaking story about how in the desert, Bedad fell in love with her at first sight. She was extremely tired of being a beauty. The brunette froze in surprise because he didn't expect Shad to fall in love with someone. A person who doesn't see anything or anyone around him couldn't experience bright feelings. Warren decided to play by the same rules. He asked if Ira found the Pizian palace a comfortable place for her. Everyone was very kind to her. The girl stated that the man was also extremely nice, and he smiled back, still wondering how Bedad could have been fooled by looks alone. Turning to Kareem, Asina reminded him of the words that one cannot communicate with others, except Ra-Kun. The brunette was surprised that the lady remembered this after so much time. Turning back to Vereen, the lady said with her eyes alone that she no longer wished to talk. The man apologized. He did not mean to show disrespect. If Behi finds out what happened and doesn't pat him on the head, the lady suggested keeping the meeting a secret so that everything would be fine. The woman decided to do this to take revenge for the fact that she was disturbed that night. The man looked after her. A strange atmosphere hovered around him. Nazir arrived to Milady early in the morning. To report something, she immediately asked what had happened this time, because in fact she did not quite understand. The young man suggested having a chat over a cup of tea. The lady decided to ask her question too. The man introduced himself as a ruler, but asking about him directly would have been a deadly trick. The girl clarified what kind of place it was. Sharza, the blue-eyed man, immediately thought about it. He chuckled. He didn't quite understand why the lady was interested, but he explained that Sharza was one of the smallest autonomous regions. Despite its size, the place is still the greatest concern of all the Khuns. The region is the most fertile, and therefore brings in the most taxes and offerings. The rulers of Sharza wield considerable influence in Pizian, and have raised a powerful army there to settle the fairly frequent conflicts. The current leader is not really the best. Umar suddenly stopped. He shouldn't have mentioned the man out of place. Someone called the Lord. He stood up and asked for forgiveness. He had an urgent matter that needed to be resolved as quickly as possible. The girl nodded. She only hoped that everything was okay. While the two were talking, the brunette carefully approached the bag that had been hanging on the wall the whole time. The young man sensed something was wrong and turned back sharply. Asina peacefully drank tea and pretended not to understand where the extra suspicion came from. The hero thought he had caught something, but no, it was a hallucination again. Nazir asked for forgiveness for the way the conversation had turned out. He would have to let the lady go back to the estate if anything they could meet again. Warren always remembered how he sat at the bedside of Kun, who was dying. He asked to fulfill Sharza's last wish, which they cherished for so long. The independence of the country was a priority. The young man understood that he was in a foul mood. It was probably all because of that stranger. He felt a kinship with the previous Kun. But now he had a woman, and his face became more alive. The brunette began to feel as if he was the only one marking time, and this gradually began to drive him crazy. Things in Pigeon were more boring than ever. The young man did not understand when he would be able to escape from the feeling of loneliness that constantly haunted him. Someone ran right in front of his nose, forcing him to raise his head. The gaze met with a beautiful lady with scarlet eyes and snow-white hair. She was so beautiful that the heart sank. A little earlier, Noor knocked on Asana's door, saying that she had brought her dinner. She assumed that the lady had had a long conversation with Nazir. The food had already cooled down, but she of course warmed it up. The girl thanked her in her opinion. The food looked great. Nodding, the assistant promised that she would return very soon to take the plate. As soon as the door closed, the lady rushed to the hidden bag. She did not understand when she would finally be allowed to be alone. What was happening was starting to bore her. The girl did not understand why the chief confiscated the worn-out thing. There was nothing special about it until the moment the spell disappeared. Initially, there were several other spells placed on the bag, in addition to the protective ones. Asina knew that thanks to this, only she could get the real items. Large objects were placed inside. Fake objects were very helpful, because the girl always carried them with her. In general, they were intended to play tricks on people. While Nazir was busy with his business, the girl switched the bag with a deft movement of her hand, taking the real one with her. Having taken out all the things, Lisi looked around and was glad that everything she needed was in place. She was only confused by the fact that Umar, being perceptive, could notice the substitution. The brunette reassured herself that the feast was coming soon, and she would be able to escape from the kingdom. Once outside, she decided to check the place that was the most guarded. In advance, the princess marked almost all the locations inside the palace to make it easier to escape. But for some reason, she could not understand what the huge tower in the distance was, for no matter how much she asked, no one told her. The lady's secrecy only made her more curious, and at the first opportunity, she snuck closer, hoping to find out what secret was hidden there. Initially, the lady assumed that there might be a secret brother or son of Kun. She had a lot of expectations, but as soon as her face was at the bars, it became clear that not everything was so rosy. There were many treasures inside that were not really as valuable as they were made out to be. The trinkets were certainly beautiful, but it was still a disappointment to the lady. Having decided to go back, the girl realized that she should hurry so as not to miss anything. Suddenly, the earrings began to hum. All this is strange, because there should still be mana left in them. Her hair suddenly turned white, and her eyes returned to their previous shade. Asina followed all the recommendations, but still nothing worked. On the street, the lady met Warren, but quickly ran away. The ruler was called by a servant, who said that she had been ordered to be nearby. When the young man turned back, he realized that there was no one around anymore. It seemed to him that he had begun to have waking dreams strangely, but he still clearly remembered what that woman looked like. Silver hair shone like moonlight, and cold scarlet eyes sparkled in the shadows, making him fall in love. Their gazes met for only a second, but still took his breath away. The girl made her way back to her room. She put her head in her hands, because she didn't understand what to do next. She took out her anger on inanimate objects, because she understood that things wouldn't get better. Having exhaled, she had to calm down. She could only hope that the Southerners did not understand what Asina looked like, the mother of the Lady of Authority, but she hoped that the influence did not reach the South. When Lysaea was in her city, the lady posted flyers about her daughter's disappearance all over the northern continent to try to find hers. The woman thought that she would get away with it. Even Nazir would hardly have complete information about the affairs of the North. The lady took off her earrings. She was still thinking about what to do next. Her thoughts were interrupted when there was a knock on the door. There was a maid who asked to come in. Milady shouted for them to wait for her, because she needed to change clothes. Noor was still standing behind the door, but this time she quietly offered her help. He heard footsteps behind him. Shad approached, and measuring the maid with his gaze, asked why she was standing there when it would be easier to open the door. He needed to get inside. The lady simply had no other option. She put her earrings back on because she still hoped that something would change. A second later, the lady turned into her dark-haired form, and she immediately wanted to scream the decoration was working fine, but decided to malfunction somehow. Ra-kun entered the room and immediately noticed that the woman was in a bad mood. The girl turned away, but then a hand touched her cheek and then her ear. The man suddenly decided to ask what kind of thing the heroine had on her ears. He had been looking closely for a long time and thought that the earrings were magical. It was impossible not to notice. The woman exhaled. There was no point in denying it. She would obviously have to wriggle out of it as best she could. She said that the earrings had protective magic. It only worked in fire and water. The brunette improvised, and now hoped that she would still be able to fool Shad. Silence hung in the room until the lady asked why they were looking at her so intently. Smiling slightly, the blonde said that he was watching how cute she was. Asina blushed. Everyone knew that he didn't think so. It was just a lie to confuse. A lady constantly calls herself a beauty, so she shouldn't act as if it's not true. She knows that, and how if she were truly loved, they would look at her with a different look. Many men fell in love with Lisi, and they all looked at her completely differently. The king calls the concubine Malav, and says that he liked her, but her look says the opposite in her eyes. There is rather curiosity, as if there was a toy in front of him. The princess tried to decipher the look, but came to the conclusion that she had no idea what the man was thinking. The brunette wanted to know what they would do to her. When curiosity subsided, perhaps they would kill her. The blonde answered ambiguously, asking if the maiden was so dangerous that he should take her life. He smiled. For now, she can live because she is still interesting. Sitting down on the bed, the young man patted the seat next to him. Still little was known about Asina. He would like to hear the full story of her life. The girl could have told about her travels, about where she had been, but looking with suspicion, she asked if Ra-kun really wanted to know such details. Baydad realized that if he wanted to know more, he would have to amuse the lady. Now he also began to understand why the chief kept only birds as pets. Sitting down next to him, the woman told him that she had managed to walk around the entire northern continent, visited all 10 significant places in Cromwell for her. This was the main achievement as a traveler. The hero nodded, but asked if it was dangerous to wander the continent alone. The lady might seem frail, but she knew that she was actually in excellent shape. At first the mood was good, but over time, Asina mentioned the fact that she once almost died. It all started when she just started traveling to outstanding places. The girl found herself near ancient relics. Many said that secrets of the past were discovered in their depths. For a long time, nothing could be found, but finally a historical place called Rothville was found. The brunette didn't have a map of the area, so when she went inside the formation, she decided to make marks. But out of nowhere, a wall appeared and blocked the exit, thus locking the lady in for a whole month. Until that moment, the heroine only enjoyed traveling, not even allowing the thought that it could be dangerous there. When the lady got stuck there, everything turned out differently. The girl was scared because she was in complete darkness between 4 walls that did not give in no matter how hard she hit them. The hardest thing to endure was absolute unbearable loneliness. The lady lay all alone all the time. If she had not calmed herself with thoughts of the people she had met on her travels, she might have actually lost her mind. At first, the girl remembered all the beautiful places she had seen in her travels around the world. And as she sank into the pool of memory, she remembered her family and moments at home. Mother had always been cold and strict with her daughter. But at that hour, thoughts of moments when she had been loving came into her head. Lying on the cold floor, the girl asked for forgiveness. The blonde, having listened to half of the story, asked how the traveler ended up in the south, but the heroine suddenly declared that she wouldn't tell it just like that. Shad chuckled, asking what the concubine wanted this time. The woman fell silent, but finally answered that she wanted dates. It was a simple wish. The lady recently tried some, and she liked it very much. The young man at first thought that she wanted date trees, but as it turned out, the question was about 1 bowl. The blonde promised that he would do everything to ensure that the lady got what she wanted, and he asked her to tell him how she got out of the historical trap that had captured her. At first, the princess desperately looked for a way out, but as time passed, her desire to get out melted away with it, and at some point she gave up and just lay there. Eventually, the body simply had no strength left to move, and the heroine abandoned the idea of getting out lying on the ground. She suddenly noticed something on the ceiling. At the top, there were patterns that looked more like writing. Jumping up, the blonde realized that it said, "Truth has only one path," in an ancient language. Grabbing the firewood that was in her bag, the girl decided to light it. She reproached herself for not noticing anything for a long time. In archaeology, truth and light are practically synonyms. When several torches were lit, the lady decided to check the walls for written sources, one of which said that the path to truth cannot be achieved without sacrifices. The blonde quickly realized that blood was needed. She was lucky that it was only a small amount, not life-threatening. What happened next was even more amazing. It turned out that the exit was right on the floor, where the woman had lain for a whole month. She cut her palm and allowed drops of blood to touch the ground. When Asina climbed out and the clear night sky appeared above her head, she remembered what it was like to feel alive. She liked that feeling. The heroine explained to the blonde that she always avoided places that were dangerous to life. He looked at her intently, all because it seemed strange to him. Judging by what the maiden had already told him, it seemed to Bedad that she, on the contrary, would seek out dangerous places. She looked like a person who would be interested in gaining new experiences. There must have been another reason in the lady's head that she didn't tell him about. The brunette thought he was right, but telling the truth was a little awkward. When Asina returned home 3 months later, she saw her mother in tears for the first time, and only then did she realize that everything had changed. Usually, the woman was always cold to the girl. Sometimes it seemed that they were not even related that day. Everything changed. She said that she would not tell Asina how she should live. The blonde cried, asking that at least a few months a year the girl spend time with her mother, who loved her very much for them. The child was the only one she was given by heaven itself. The heroine was worried and did not understand what would happen to her if the girl suddenly died. The brunette would never have thought that she would see her strict mother in tears. Asina had long accepted the fact that she could not be an ideal daughter, but she did not want to become a bad one either. Her mother had given her a life that was worth appreciating, and the girl had promised herself not to go into dangerous places for this very reason. The heroine understood how what was happening looked from the outside. She was going to be careful, but now she was being held hostage by the king of an enemy country. The beauty never expected that everything would be exactly like this. Realizing again where fate had led her, the lady turned away. She should have gone to bed because of the fatigue that had taken over her body. At first, the lady just wanted to pretend, but her eyes seemed to become heavier. In a second, she plunged into the kingdom of Morpheus. The young man sat next to her, watching her beauty. Taking a closer look, the blonde exhaled. The woman was sleeping so peacefully, as if there was no one nearby who could kill her behind her innocent face. There were probably many secrets hidden. Ra-Kun, having gathered, was about to kiss the princess, but he froze. He did not know if he would be able to stop if he started. He was worried about the thought that if he desired the beauty, the situation would get worse. What is more surprising is that this is a desire that he has to try to suppress. Night had fallen. Outside, the governor's assistant arrived at the first call, and bending down asked what had happened. Varen explained that Rogve would have to find someone. The brunette nodded just one word, and he would bring the person the man wanted to see. He would have to look for a woman with silver hair and scarlet eyes. The servant was surprised, but decided to ask about special features. After thinking for just a second, the young man said that she was unusually beautiful, so much so that it took your breath away. In the morning, the brunette looked closely at her reflection in the mirror. She realized that the color of her eyes was becoming more scarlet. The magic in the earrings was completely running out. She had no time left at all. The feast was supposed to begin the next day. On that night outing, Milady marked the route to the exit and found out when the guard was changing. Everything was happening earlier than planned, but it was worth setting out even earlier. A servant came to Shad. He asked what happened. It turned out that one of his subordinates came to the ruler in the evening. It seems that Warren began to act. Umar is not sure of the truth, but it seems that the hero gave his man some kind of order, according to the words of the young maid, who was assigned to the man he saw something during a walk a few days ago. Raccoon ordered to continue watching, and he himself was immersed in thoughts. He remembered that the concubine asked for dates. He promised her a whole bowl and understood that he had to fulfill the promise. Karim arrived to Nur, who was outside the mistress's chambers. The sun was already setting, but it seemed that the heroine still had not gotten up. She was too tired. The brunette chuckled. It was strange for him. Usually the girl gets up at the crack of dawn and wanders around the palace instead of sitting in one place. Nur sadly reported that the girl had already refused breakfast and lunch, and when they decided to bring her a snack, she also refused. Karim was indifferent, saying that as soon as the lady got hungry, she would leave herself. Several people arrived and asked if they were really in Ira's room. The girl didn't know what was going on behind the door. She had pretended to be sick since the morning. She was fine. She understood that she needed to save as much mana as possible. In the earrings, she removed the spell from her eyes, and hiding under the blanket, decided to sit in the room until the feast. Nur decided not to wait. She was really worried about the lady. She entered the room, having warned, before the girl immediately had to put magic on herself so as not to seem suspicious. The maid carefully asked how the heroine was feeling. She poured tea. The girl liked something like this last time, so this time the drink could help restore her strength. Before she could tell the main thing, the lady fell silent because several servants also entered, bringing with them gifts from Shad. In addition to jewelry, there were dates on the plate. The brunette got out of bed, asking what was going on. Raccoon said that he wanted to thank the girl for the night spent together. Karim choked in surprise, and Nur began asking questions, assuming that something interesting had happened then. The blonde assumed that the gift was for the fact that the lady was able to get out of that place. The maid still had her own thoughts, but decided to leave Ira to rest. Before leaving, the girl asked what to do with all the gifts. Perhaps they should have been taken. The woman thanked her, but asked to leave it for later. She needed to rest a little more. Having closed the door, the assistant promised that she would come as soon as she was called, looking at the accumulation of things and flowers. The heroine exhaled. She did not understand what all this meant. Shad had been working with Umar since early morning. The servants announced that someone had arrived. Jakia was glad that she was allowed in, and the first thing she did was introduce herself. The woman asked for forgiveness if she was suddenly interrupting her work, but she was told that everything was fine. Raccoon exhaled. He doubted that the girl had come to him for long. The blonde knew that the girl should have been Indira, but for some reason she remained in Alpesian. The girl lowered her head. She noticed that the man's voice and words became even colder than before. The green-eyed woman said that the Grand Vizier, her father, had summoned her to the city, saying that he wanted to discuss plans for a marriage that was to take place soon. The hero was surprised that Jakia was already at the age to get married. Listening to this, the woman sadly turned away. It was difficult for her to be in the same room with this man. If she were the daughter of another influential person, she would have been married long ago, but her father simply stopped the flow, thereby changing everything. Shad looked intently. He was sure that the heroine was taking steps forward only because of pressure from her family. She should not be given false hopes. The girl was about to be sent away, but she said that she had recently met Ira in the inner territory of the palace, and she realized that the woman was worthy. Ahmed could not leave empty-handed. She wanted to find out information about whether the girl was really locked up in the harem because they fell in love with her at first sight. Lowering his voice even more, the hero asked why he should answer questions. The girl began to apologize. She forgot who she was in front of, so she got lost in space. The red-haired woman apologized for taking up valuable time. Umar waited until the girl left and told the gentleman that when he came to Asana during the day, he was told that she had not left the room all day. Before this, the lady walked briskly around the palace every day, so this behavior is a little alarming for Shad. It was not such a big problem. Karim reported again that the next day the girl again did not get out of bed, but on the contrary, slept all day. He kept guard outside, so as not to run into Asina. Nazir assumed that the lady was sick as a foreigner. She was probably not used to the food in the south. The blue-eyed man was interested in what was really going on. The girl herself knew what she was doing. The feast was supposed to start in the evening. The brunette couldn't wait for the moment when she could finally leave Piscians. The beauty slept all day, hiding under the blanket, to give her earrings a rest. But the next day, she had a goal to give her body a rest. She would still have to cross the desert. She was thinking about what she would do next, and didn't notice how someone touched her head with a palm. A blond man arrived in the room to check on the girl's condition. The girl thought that Ra-kun was preparing for the feast, but it turned out that another person was responsible for it. The master asked how the concubine was feeling. She wanted to drive the man away, but then the lady realized that he was suspiciously polite, perhaps because he thought she was really sick. At their first meeting, the king seemed cold and scary, and the girl decided to ask the question that interested her to find out why they had spared her life in the desert. The brunette understood that it was not so important, but she still wanted to know. The young man remained silent, but then, reaching his hand to his head, he said that it seemed to him as if the lady's eyes were burning with the desire to live. Every time a man said something like that, the girl caught herself thinking that it would be better if he were as callous as he was at their first meeting. The girl was imprisoned as a criminal, but she was never forced to do anything. In fact, in Pizian, a concubine is treated as a guest. Once the young man finds out that the woman has run away, he will feel betrayed. It is a pity that everything will turn out this way, but this is not the end. Having collected her thoughts, the heroine thanked him for his care and concern, so as not to blush even more. Asina escorted the man out the door, so that he would not bother her. Before saying goodbye, the lady realized that she was seeing his face for the last time. It was time to leave, but these thoughts made her sad, which shouldn't be the case. Smiling, the heroine noted that Pizian was truly a fairy tale land. When the young man raised an eyebrow, he asked if the lady was delirious because of illness. She screamed that she was fine. To finally say goodbye, Asina waved her hand. The door closed almost immediately, and with that, the last day was over. The feast began. There was a huge table with a lot of different dishes, and people around were dancing. They were all having a great time. Noor was not going to return to the room because the lady said that she would go to bed after dinner. Karim, in order not to meet with Ira, was outside. Bedad was going to be at the banquet organized in his honor all evening. Asina planned an escape route, remembered the locations of the guard posts, and collected everything she needed. The girl knew that an hour would be enough for her to get out. The Grand Vizier was also at the banquet he had planned, and he called his daughter to him to ask him something. Gedik wanted to know more details about that conversation between Jakia and the ruler. He hoped that Ra-kun said something special, suggesting how to proceed further. The girl sadly noticed that the king was as cold as always. Obviously, he was like that because Jakia did not live up to his expectations. The girl asked for forgiveness. Although she did not see a problem, she was doing her job quite well. The man reminded that the next kuna should have the blood of the Amit family. The conversation was distracted by new guests. The ruler of Elbar greeted the vizier. Neji was almost late, but hoped that everything was still ahead, because they still had the whole night. The country the man came from is not as rich as Sharza, and its army is not nearly as strong as other territories. It is an ordinary, decent region with a decent ruler. The territory can be proud of the fact that it has nothing to be proud of. The vizier plays to the crowd, and smiling offers to drink some wine together. The old man introduced his son Mijar, who seemed to have been chosen as the next ruler, and to lighten the atmosphere, the gentleman poured more drink. At the table, they met Jalili. The man was carried away by the dancers, but for him it was logical, because they, like birds, fluttered seductively around. The girl climbed one of the buildings that was on her way, looking around. The lady noticed that there were a lot more people. There was not enough room to swing an apple on the streets. The woman saw in the distance the gates that were her destination. Many people were leaving the palace, with carts all heading in different directions. The brunette knew that it would be quite difficult to pass without being noticed. The girl had to be constantly on guard. Ra-kun's warriors were walking everywhere. Covering her face, the heroine hoped that she had nothing to worry about. In the distance, two maids could be seen discussing how good it was that Shad had returned safe and sound. The beauty behind them heard that many of the leaders were worried that all the water would evaporate. Everyone was worried that the city would be hit by a drought like in the past. The woman carefully broke away and stood behind the cart that was next in line at the gate. All that was left was to get through the border guards. The girl was called to come over. The beauty handed over the bag for inspection. Important items, of course, were not noticeable, but she was still worried that something could go wrong. The brunette was let through without noticing anything suspicious. Asina should have been happy, but it turned out to be so easy to get out that she was even upset. The girl left Pizian because she wanted to, but not all the memories from there are bad. Perhaps the lady will miss Sihad. You have to try to come to your senses. After all, the beautiful appearance is what confused the girl. She has never seen anyone so beautiful. Sitting on his throne, the young man sipped his wine, still thinking. He looked around to see if everyone they were expecting had arrived, or if someone was lost. Pizian, as is known, consisted of 6 territories: Sohar Main Dara, Muscat Neja, and Sharza, all of which carried with them some part for the country. The territories have formed alliances and fought among themselves for years for power, but now they have all come together in response to the call of their god. Warren, sitting at the table, was unusually quiet. This fact worried the gentleman. Usually at events, he is more talkative, but now he looks lost. The young man thought hard about something that only he knew. Lately, even the king had been feeling uneasy. Something was happening, but the man didn't understand what exactly. One of the rulers decided to approach Sahim and ask what was bothering him. Smiling slightly, he said that everything was fine. There was no reason to worry. The vizier also appeared from behind. He decided to join the conversation. He tried to leave Varane alone. He was already tired. The rulers had their own plans. Blue-eyed is young, but still rules Sharza with dignity. The conversation switched to Dodd, the ruler of Muscat, who was the only one who did not come to the feast in honor of Sihad. The country's representative warrior, Takev Neva, intervened in time, explaining that their great ruler was deciding clan matters. So he sent a replacement in his place. They started asking why the man's son wasn't called it. Turned out that Karim had been given the task of watching Ira. Some laughed, because such a story seemed strange. Approaching Sihad, the guest decided to talk about the harem. Everyone already knew that not long ago, the ruler had brought a woman. Everyone was happy with such news. After all, the estate had been empty for a long time. The man, as usual, had his tongue ahead of his head, because no one in their right mind would say something like that to the master raccoon, remembered that he had broken his own rule and locked the lady in the harem. At first, the beauty was as capricious as a street cat, but once she realized what her situation was, she immediately became surprisingly docile. The young man is haunted by the thought of whether the hero will be able to tame Asana. The moment when the girl thanked him for everything before they parted came into his head. The words were a formality. She shouldn't have said something like that. Without any reason, the gentleman had a feeling that he was missing something. Baydad jumped up from his seat, causing everyone around him to be surprised. They tried to ask him what happened, but there was no answer, only silence. A minute later, the young man announced that he would go to rest while the guests could enjoy the evening. For some reason, he was so anxious that it became difficult to breathe. In 10 minutes, the hero got back to Ira's room, where Noor had already met him. He understood that he had to see the lady with his own eyes to calm down. The maid reported that the girl had already had dinner and gone to bed. There was absolute silence in the room. The blonde walked inside to the bed. Karim came running a few minutes later, and just as he wanted to ask what was going on, he saw an empty space turning around. Sihad ordered in a menacing voice to quickly find Asina. The woman walked through the desert. She expected it to be cold at night, but she didn't think it would be that cold. She was glad she had cast a warming charm on her cloak. There was no one around. She decided to take off her earrings and give them a rest. The sand was gradually making her feet get stuck, making her movements constrained. Looking around, the blonde understood that she should hurry. She once again began to realize how lonely it can be when traveling. Even as a child, she had more fun. Once upon a time, the little girl traveled with Uncle John. Everything was different. Then the man was just as passionate about traveling. He showed the child what traveling was and made her fall in love with it. The little girl did not immediately understand what it meant to wander around different countries. There were many places in the world that the children did not know about. Traveling was a great way to see them. Usually children cry when they are taken to an unknown place, but this situation was different. Surprisingly, Asina, on the contrary, preferred to be where there were many unknown things. Then her uncle often quarreled with her mother. There was a time when the heroine lived according to the dictates of the family. The woman attended all the events that the girl asked for. She saw the same people every day, and even ate on schedule. For someone such a life could be normal. But for the blonde, it was unbearable. Sometimes the heroine felt that it was better to die than to live in a terrible cage. She saw how big the world was, and could not be in a closed room like a bird. Each country has its own special culture, history, and even way of life, and from the moment the lady learned about everything, she did not want to stay at home. The girl thought about how she should describe the trip to Pizion in her memoirs. For some reason, she kept remembering Ra-kun's wonderful face. She understood that she shouldn't think about such things, but her body wouldn't obey. The girl decided to focus on getting out of the desert. She will tell her family that the trip was difficult, but will hide all the details so as not to cause worries. Varine's servant came to him again. They asked him if they had managed to find any traces, and he shook his head. They asked everyone, but they still could not find any information about the woman with silver hair and scarlet eyes. The brunette nodded, as long as the situation allowed them. He wanted the search to continue. He decided to report something else. One detail that he saw on the palace grounds. He saw several of Kun's warriors leave the castle. The servant couldn't be sure if there was any action on Sharza's part. It seemed to be related to another situation, but to know for sure, he would have to infiltrate the ranks of the warriors. Meanwhile, Karim arrived to Shad. They searched the entire palace, but they could not find the woman. It seems that she is already outside the palace. The warriors comb the city, but because of the festival, it is too crowded. Tracking down the right person is incredibly difficult. Even so, the knight is sure that Era is still within the city walls. With such a fragile female body, the girl could not leave Pizion so easily. Ra-kun continued to remain silent. He did not scold or punish, not a single muscle on him twitched the whole night. Finally, the hero spoke up. He did not agree, because for a lady it was easiest to slip away beyond Pizion. Karim immediately began to apologize, but he was asked to calm down. The man did not let his guard down. It was all Shad's fault. He remembered how the girl had escaped from the most secure prison. He could not lower his responsibility. He should have kept a better eye on her. The young man was careless. Asina was not afraid that she was locked in an unknown place, because she knew that she could leave whenever she wanted. No matter how harsh the cage was, a person would not be afraid if the door was open. The harem was located in the farthest part of the palace, and the master was confident that the lady would not be able to escape if he kept her in sight on a constant basis. Umar brought the bag that the hero asked to take. They had previously examined all the things, but could not find anything suspicious. The protective spell on the bag was removed. The lady probably took all the important items with her. Getting up from the throne, the blonde ordered to call Azimi. He himself made the others freeze in horror. The gentleman was not going to give up so easily. He decided that he needed to track down the girl before she managed to run away too far. The ruler of Warrain went to the chief chamberlain early in the morning. Iman reported that unfortunately, Shad would not be able to receive the man because he himself was busy. The young man is away and will not be arriving in the city for a long time. Ra-kun's servant had no idea what would happen next. He asks to be excused, but he must go because in fact there are still many unfinished business. The man thought about what would happen next. First, the mobilization of Kun's warriors took place, and then he himself left the palace. This is very strange. Warren felt like he was missing something. He needed to find out all the details to understand how to proceed. He couldn't just leave things as they were. In the morning, the lady felt terrible. She forgot how terrible the heat was in the desert. The road to Surt through the desert is extremely dangerous, but this city is the only open city of Pizion, which has a port. The girl planned to get there and find a ship heading to the northern continent. Now the lady was not so optimistic. She felt as if she would bake in the heat faster than she could reach Surt, not to mention the ship. A figure appeared in the distance. The blonde assumed that she was hallucinating, or that there really was a man walking there. She hoped that her hair would not be visible under the hood. The lady was immediately asked who she was. A sword was pointed at the lady. All men in the desert first point their weapons, and then ask questions. The brunette asked what the girl was doing in the desert. She should have known what kind of place this was. The stranger's face was covered, so it was difficult to make out his expression. Asina tried to calm herself down. After all, she had outlived a man whose head was in even worse trouble. The lady rose and said that she was just an innocent wanderer. But they did not believe her, because this was not a place where a girl could wander alone. The blonde asked to lower the sword before continuing the conversation. They finally started talking normally, and it immediately became clear that the guy's name was Akka. He said that he was from Kratia and was heading to Pisian. Seeing the contents of the bag, he believed that Asina was a traveler. The girl explained that since her journey was over, she decided not to go to Kratia. She decided to go through the desert, since this was the shortest route to Surt. The hero grinned. No one would want to get to Surt through the desert. All normal people go around in order to stay alive. The girl is either stupid or likes to suffer. The girl laughed nervously. She couldn't tell that she was on the run. The man's aura reminded him of Cromwell. Perhaps one of his parents was from there. The young man had been to Surt before, and the beauty wanted to know if she could get there in a week. She didn't know the area very well. The blue-eyed man began to make fun of her again, noticing that with such a move, the lady wouldn't even have a month. He wanted to get angry, because the stupid man underestimated the wanderer. The blonde decided not to think about it so much. The most important thing was that the person was from the city where Asina was going. If she got there in a week, she would finally be able to breathe a sigh of relief. Finally, the two decided to say goodbye. The girl promised that she would not die, which meant that everything would be fine with her. She had to move faster to make it in time. For some reason, Akka silently followed her, although he was going in the other direction. The brunette was indignant, because he thought that he was simply busy with his own affairs. He asked her not to pay attention to him. They had to resign themselves to it because the young lady had no other choice. The two of them went forward, remaining absolutely taciturn. Shad gathered a group. He divided the warriors into 3 subgroups and sent them to Alpesian and Sharza. Under the direct command of Ra Kun were 7 divisions of soldiers and Azimi, the most skilled. Karim did not understand whether the gentleman would really go alone, turning around. The young man forced him to remain silent with just one look. Ra Kun said that he would probably be gone for a long time, so they should pay special attention to protecting the palace. Shad got ready and said goodbye. It was time for him to go. The young man knows where to go, perhaps. If he were that woman, he would go where it would be difficult to find her. The man realized that everything was much simpler. Ira was in the desert. She was a smart and cunning girl who knew no fear. She once miraculously managed to survive there. But it was into the desert that she went. The horses rushed forward. The hero did not want to waste even more time. Some kind of connection had not yet developed between him and the girl, so that he would feel something for her. The young man only wanted to use the lady, but now he is overcome by strange emotions that make him doubt that he doesn't have much choice anyway. The woman who imprisoned the hero in emotional hell will have to be caught. The search party from the west found nothing the same with the city of Surt. The fugitive could leave the desert and head to Fars. The sun was beginning to set. Everyone understood that when it got dark, tracking down the girl would be even more difficult. The soldiers did not quite understand why Shad was personally looking for this man. One of the leaders asked not to ask unnecessary questions. They were required to do the job and not just sit in one place. Akka still followed the beauty. He asked if she liked it. In Pisian nodding, the lady said that it was great but did not add any details. The god of the country is impressive. The lady turned out to have seen Raccoon with her own eyes. The girl said that it happened by chance, but even so, she was very lucky. Even so, the chances of seeing him are usually extremely small. Commoners rarely get to see aristocrats, and besides, Raccoon almost never shows up at festivals. The girl was incredibly lucky to catch a glimpse of him from afar, something she can brag about for the rest of her life. The very last god rebuilt the country from scratch after the Civil War. And okay, it doesn't matter, because this fact alone is already amazing. He became one of the 4 who were awarded the title of Ra. The girl decided to ask about the country. Kratia and Pesian were enemies. It was surprising that a man admired the king of an enemy state so much. Something appeared in the distance. Akka quickly realized that a sandstorm was coming. The young man raised his binoculars to take a closer look and understand what awaited them. A second later, fear was reflected on the man's face. He dropped the thing and indignantly turned to the lady, asking if she was on the run. The girl, instead of answering, asked, "Who was there?" Obviously a whole squad, judging by the columns of sand that they were raising. There were clearly more than a couple of people there. The woman began to worry, since she had expected to gain at least a day's head start if she ran away after the feast. The heroine replied that she had not committed a crime, but that there had simply been a small misunderstanding. Aka was not the type to believe just like that. Because of a misunderstanding, a whole crowd would not run after a lady while being at the peak of his activity. The young man decided to save his skin. He thanked them for knowing each other, but he thought that it would be better for the lady alone. The girl decided to check one last time. She wanted to know how long it would take to catch up with her. If people hurried, they would be there in an hour. It was perfectly clear that if the lady was caught again, she would not get away with a harem. She would have to run as fast as she could just to avoid being caught. Noticing how much the woman wanted to run away, Aka advised her to go into the sandstorm, where it was pitch black because of the sand, and it would be easy to hide there. Asina will have to go voluntarily, otherwise she will still be caught. There is not much choice left. The blonde exhaled, the young man is right. Even a storm is much better than crawling back into an even greater hell. The girl thanked him for the advice and promised that they would see each other again if their paths crossed. The woman left a toy bunny in the palm of her new acquaintance. The lady made her hair light brown, just in case she was told that it would take about an hour, but the horses were already very close. There was no time left. Speeding up, the lady began to hope that she could hide in the sands. She did not understand why Behdad decided to pursue her at all. He probably thinks that she is a spy. The woman tripped over a stone and fell, raising her head. The girl realized that horses had gathered around. A gentleman walked forward, asking where she was going in such a hurry. A rough voice orders them to go back. The young man is arrogant. He treats the girl as if she is his property. Trying to swallow the insult, the lady asks why they followed her at all. Whatever Asina had done, she didn't think it would be a good enough reason to mobilize the soldiers. The man couldn't believe that the girl thought he would let her go so easily. The blonde feels strange. He thought that he would be even more angry if he found Ira, because she dared to deceive him. But now that she is nearby, the most vivid feeling is relief. Rising from the ground, the brunette asked if they were going to kill her. The hero did not understand how this could bother him, although he had said exactly that from the very beginning. Turning to Behdad, Asina wanted to say something one last time. For her to be limited by someone was worse than death. A horse whistle appeared in the lady's hands. The animals immediately began to go crazy, and taking advantage of the chaos, the lady jumped up and rushed into the sandstorm. The storm was so powerful that the lady could hardly see anything in front of her. She hoped that this would at least delay those who were pursuing her a little. The woman hoped that as soon as she managed to get out, everything would be fine. But suddenly, everything stopped. It became quiet and heavy. Steps were heard behind her. The girl seemed to have forgotten that before her was God in the flesh, who was capable of doing anything. The heroine should have stopped rebelling even earlier. Having started to try to break free, the girl said that she needed to go back. She needed to go home, since it had already become clear that she was not a spy. The young man grinned. Now the lady could forget about it. I wanted to scream, asking if Raccoon had gone crazy, but then something worse happened. The magic in the earrings ran out, and my hair instantly turned a beautiful white color. In fact, Asana looks exactly like this. She had to admit it. She understood that she needed to run, but for some reason, her body did not move. The warriors came running. Shad, without thinking twice, threw a cape over the woman's head and then hid it behind him, so that her hair color, which had changed, would not be noticeable. After some time, they returned to Kun's chambers. The girl thought that she would be dragged back to the harem, but something happened. Behi did not even utter a word on the way back. Coming closer, the hero finally ordered an explanation. Asina repeated again that her true appearance was exactly like this. She simply changed it when she went on a journey. The lady spoke the pure truth about her adventures and changed her appearance only for this reason. There was no other reason. The maiden does not consider that she is obliged to tell the whole truth, since they are not so close. The girl did not commit a crime. On the contrary, Shad was the one who did not believe a single word she said from the very beginning and treated her like a criminal. She does not see the point in being completely honest. Exhaling, the hero had to overcome himself and ask who the lady was. He wanted to know something about her personality. No longer wanting to lie and avoid answering, the lady declared that no matter how they threatened her, she would not say another word. Everything would happen only over her dead body. The blonde was very angry at the statement. The girl was obviously unable to think clearly and did not understand the situation she was in. From the moment Lisha was caught, she would never see freedom again. The girl will be left in captivity in Raccoon's chambers, and while she sits there, she will have time to think about what would actually be the best thing to do. Alone, the lady will understand how well she lived before. A servant arrived to Warren that same evening to report that his master's detachment had returned from the desert. Kun had returned with Azami. It seemed he had not gone far enough to get anything important. Blue-Eyed began to worry the hero had recently returned from Ismail, but for some reason he returned back again. It would be worth finding out where Raccoon was after arriving. Bekdad's behavior became puzzling. It became interesting to know who the ruler was. Who was not in Alpecian. Measures were taken to delay the arrival of the rulers supporting Kund. They tried to separate everyone, some were against the bandits, and some had their carts hit. Izmir defeated most of the bandits on his way. Dad will obviously be delayed for a long time, and Vika is expected in the capital. Warren would not mind finishing off the old man, but he is not going to send more bandits because he does not see the point in it. The man's family is influential, and generations of grand viziers have come from it, so killing him would be extremely reckless. All that remains is to find that very woman, the one with the scarlet eyes and white hair. Someone arrived. He apologized for being late. Warren ordered him to explain, and it sounded more like a real threat taking off his hood. The young man smiled, assuring that he met the girl with white hair. Asina stood on the balcony, looking forward at the sky. 4 days had already passed since she was dragged into Kun's chambers for the blonde. These were the worst days of her entire life. First, things were confiscated again, as expected. Then the girl was locked in a room and was not allowed to go out even into the corridor. 2 more maids were allowed into the room, whom they had never met before. They watched around the clock. Several days passed since they stood like dolls in the corner, not answering a single word, and Bedad still did not appear. Everyone refused to talk to the lady, and she had nothing to do but eat and sleep. That was all the beauty did. The young man knew well how to torture Asina. She would have preferred to be tortured, but instead she was constantly alone, bored. The maiden wondered what had happened in the desert. The storm ended in the blink of an eye, and the lady did not know what it was. When the heroine first heard that Piscean was ruled by God, she thought that it was just an expression after all. In most kingdoms, rulers are also considered as such. No one could have guessed that Behi really had magical powers. He didn't use magic, but this made them ask even more questions. While the lady was eating, she suddenly thought about Nur. She realized that perhaps the girl was in trouble because of the lady's escape from the harems. The heroine began to persistently try to find out information from the maids. She would like to know what happened to her former assistant. The beauty tried to get him to talk, and it seemed to bear fruit. She was finally given an answer, but it was not comforting. Nur was sent to prison. Nazir, meanwhile, arrived to Shad at the most inconvenient time. He should have listened to the chamberlain and not gone to the main hall. Ra-Kun did not look happy, and his condition was strange. The man was ready to execute anyone who would get on his nerves. If this is the king that Umar knows, the man would not mind if Warren was executed. The blonde refused. The hero tried to calm the ruler down. The woman could be a spy. After all, she knows a lot about Cromwell. They had reason to suspect detaining a person hiding his appearance and identity is a common thing. The assistant had never seen the master overcome by his own feelings. It seemed that God had a human side too. No matter who Miss Asina is and why she came to Piscean, they won't do anything about it. The girl has a strong influence on the ruler. The young man is going to try to get to the truth, making it as easy as possible. Sitting in the room, the heroine wanted to cry, because Nur was punished only because of her. She did not understand why this was so, because she acted without help. The maid poured tea that didn't smell of anything, and suddenly, moments came to mind when there was always someone nearby who cared. Grabbing the cup, the lady abruptly broke it, causing herself to get hurt. The girl ordered Bahai to be brought to her, or for her to be allowed to go to him. The trick worked well, but it couldn't be done forever. It was painful. The woman was going to meet the man as soon as possible. Virgo thought about telling the truth, but every time she revealed her identity, everything ended badly. Pisian can take the lady hostage and demand a large ransom from Cromwell, while the North can make claims, and war will begin. She couldn't allow herself and her family to get into trouble. The girl never wanted to cause trouble. Arriving at Bahai, the lady decided to ask to punish herself instead of Nur. The maid was not guilty of anything. The girl believed that she herself should bear the punishment for her actions. Nur had always been her friend, and she should be let go. The blonde smirked. Logic didn't work in the kingdom. The young man always used his authority, but he was never so stubborn. The woman does not understand what she did. She was locked up against her will, and although she told the truth, no one believed her. She tried to escape. The hero takes it out on the beauty because he is upset. He grabbed her by the neck and put guards in place, and even threw Nur into prison. The girl began to cry. Despite all that courage, she could no longer say anything. Asina did not cry to be pitied. She was going to go back to her room and think about everything there. Leaving the room, the girl reproached herself for her emotions, and on top of all this, she ran into Nazir. He did not understand who was in front of him. Virgo explained that she looked normal. She had to change her appearance when traveling, as a rule. Her appearance attracted a lot of attention. The girl seemed like a rare beauty before, but now Umar can't even take his eyes off her. I had to ask a question that worried the heroine a lot. She wanted to know if she really looked like a spy. Blue-Eyed could not say with certainty that the woman would like to understand why they were treating her this way, since no serious crimes had been committed. The maid said it was time to go back. Nazir said one last time that even though everything had turned out wrong, he wanted the lady to be able to leave in peace. Better to be careful. Mr. is a difficult man who will not give up so easily. Everything is clear. Iman was asked, who knows about the return of the master? He said that only 5 to 6 people as far as is known, and all the servants are also informed. The other rulers were cautious, perhaps thinking that the hero had set a trap. Everyone was interested to know why the king left so quickly. He nodded, asking what excuse they had managed to come up with for him and how it all happened. Iman did not understand why they did not tell the truth. If everyone had known that the young man had gone after a woman, they would have definitely understood him. The assistant was amused by what was happening. He could not hide it. Some would like to have an audience, but he would still have to refuse. The brunette was about to report that the gentleman simply did not leave his chambers. No more jokes could be told, otherwise the consequences would be dire. Despite his behavior, Iman remained alive. He is grateful for this. You can do with rulers as your heart desires. But it was worth assigning more guards to the master's chambers. I had to ask again to clarify whether it was worth guarding Aira. Obviously, the king was afraid that the lady would slip away again. Strengthening security is unlikely to help. Iman would not like to get in the way, but he understands that everything is not so simple. The young man did not want to be tactless, but he would like to say something. A long time ago, a ruler was given a bird. He loved it very much and looked after it as best he could. The bird still tried to leave the cage. The ruler broke its wings so that it would not fly away, after which it gradually died in agony. You can't achieve it by imprisoning someone else's heart. The young man remembered how the lady cried, asking why he was doing this to her. One of the rulers arrived to be given shelter. He understood that he could not simply escape and looked tired. Shad is in a bad mood, so the hero tried to hide from his sight as quickly as possible. They say that he is constantly working. The young man has no urgent business, so no one has any idea what is going on, and everyone is stupid to death. Nazir understood what was wrong, but decided not to speak out openly. The ruler asked what happened, why the man was also busy with business. Cromwell sent his ambassador. They are allies of Cradia, so it is scary to understand why they went to Pisian, which is their enemy. The ambassador is quite influential. He belongs to the Astati family. This name is familiar, but only in the north. Akka, who was standing behind the door and watching, thought about it. The surname seemed familiar to him too. He remembered that lady with white hair and her origin. Nazir decided to send someone to find out more details. They needed to be sure of what was going on. Shad is asked to rest. He worked for 2 days without any breaks, without even sleeping, deciding that this was the best decision. The gentleman seemed to be angry because of the unsolicited advice, but Iman could not stand his ground, so he simply left him alone. The man thought that when he got the girl back, he would feel better, but for some reason, nothing changes. The mere fact that the lady is resisting his will is already driving him crazy. I would like to think that if I left the lady nearby, the anxiety and anger would leave the body, but this did not happen. There is no freer spirit than Ira's. If you lock her up, she will never look at you with a warm gaze or smile. The girl hides a lot and is constantly looking for an opportunity to escape from the king. She will never submit. The young man managed to reach his chambers, although he himself did not notice it. Perhaps due to lack of sleep problems, with his head began. Inside the room, the man met his Ira. She as always was unhappy, asking why he came without warning. Placing his palm on her cheek, Bed had realized that the girl had swollen eyes, she had trouble sleeping, and because of someone she couldn't even fall asleep. The girl wanted to move away, but then someone grabbed her hand, because it became obvious that there was a wound on her palm, bandaged with bandages. Blondie explained that she thought that having to blackmail the maids to get a conversation with the king wasn't as bad as it seemed. Noor is important to the lady, so she went to extreme measures. She did not want to drag strangers into the mess because of her problems. The young man said that he had ordered the maid to be released, not expecting to hear anything like that. The lady fell silent, but still thanked her. The blonde made a strange face. He was acting strangely, as if something in him had changed more than expected. The hero lowered himself and pinned Ira to the bed with his body. He said that he was simply very tired, so he did not see a problem. The blonde was against this. She wanted to leave, but they wouldn't let her go. All the emotions that had kept the man awake for the last few days evaporated in the girl's arms. The king could not think of anything else. He no longer even cared who was in front of him. The only thing that mattered was that Milady remained nearby. Still leaving Asina alone, the young man sat down next to her. He decided to ask questions, and the first thing he asked was about her family. A man should have a family, and friends too, so he should understand this at least a little. The girl decided to ask in response. The boy had brothers and sisters, but they failed the exam to become a kun and were killed, which is a common occurrence for Pizians. It became clear why the man seemed so cruel. At first, he grew up in an environment where you can't rely on anyone in order to survive. He had to kill. The girl knows people with the same look for a beauty. It is too cruel. But the king never saw a problem. It is difficult to understand the young man, and therefore one has to be afraid. But the man looks so lonely that one feels sorry for him. From the very morning, the ruler of Darak told how much he enjoyed being in Pizian, so much so that he did not want to return. Warren listened until he reported that he had received a letter after the festival was over. The plan would begin to go into action. It was rumored that Shad left the palace to catch some woman who seemed to have escaped from him. For Varain, what was happening was absurd because there is no smoke without fire. The palace maids let it slip that there was still a girl in the harem again. The ruler acts as if everything in the world is bland to him, but now it seems that something has changed. It is very strange. Some also said that the concubine had an unusual appearance. Scarlet eyes and snow-white hair, very different from the local girls. A strange feeling appeared in his chest. The man was sure that Ira looked somehow different. She was ordinary, not so wonderful. Akha entered the room. He used the window. He had to disguise himself as a servant in order to enter the castle and find out everything. The young man learned that Shad had found a woman and was so captivated by her that he even left his work post to be with her. When the blue-eyed man learned about the lady's appearance, he smiled slyly. He seemed to understand who we were talking about. Everything was not so simple. Sitting down at the table, the man began to tell how he met Ira in the desert when he was returning to Pizian. He knew who she was, but it was still strange that a girl from such a powerful family could meet Rakun. Akka knew the identity, but he was not going to tell it so easily. He asked for payment first, and Warren agreed. Blue-eyed had never seen the ruler so desperate. He asked to give up the Krim vineyard in Sharzisut. The king of Daraha, sitting next to him, grinned. The man had a good lip. He had set too high a price. Instead of refusing, the young man grabbed the paper. He would sign the contract and then ask for the transfer deed. Morning came. The girl woke up. She hadn't slept so well for a long time. Behi left, but it's strange that they felt good together. After Asina got ready for the new day, she was told that guests had arrived, and Karim was standing near the entrance. Nazir came out from behind the Tamer. He probably came to conduct another interrogation. In any case, the lady had no choice but to agree. Karim was surprised. when he saw the new appearance of Milady opening her mouth. She confirmed her identity. Sarcasm cannot be taken away from her. Nazir began to speak. He hoped that the girl would understand the fact that leaving the room was prohibited. The man wasted no time and immediately proposed a deal, the essence of which was that the girl would receive the necessary information in exchange for details about the political situation in the north. The heroine had no choice but to agree in order to get out. She needed any information that she could get her hands on. The girl had long wanted to know what kind of power the king used to suppress the storm in the desert of death. The gentleman's assistant's face visibly tensed when he heard he had always smiled before, but everything had changed. The answer was soon given. Kun is the title of the king, and Shad is the name of God. The current ruler received both names from the first leader. Shad Kun had 3 sons when he died in Ismail Humor. Persian was divided into 3 nations. After the new ruler, upon ascending the throne, received several titles. The first of all managed to make this once lifeless land fertile. The assistants themselves do not really know what powers the master has. However, everyone knows that he could raise the entire city to the ground if he wanted to. The truth puzzled her even more. It was difficult for the girl to understand that someone could have such abilities. After going to bed, Asana kept thinking about what Nazir had told her before leaving. He had said that without the master, the whole country would collapse. The man asked not to give the young man false hopes if in the end she was unable to reciprocate her feelings. He was worried that they would fall in love with the girl, but she assured him that everything was fine, because she wasn't even a local, but came from the north. Asina wanted to leave, so that she would not be dragged back to the harem. She thought that she could solve all her problems peacefully. The man was always commanding her, not giving her any chances. At night, an assistant came to the estate of the ruler of Sharza. He saw complete destruction there. Akka came during the day. He probably angered him with something. Blue-Eyed knew that there was something he really wanted, but it was impossible to get. All he could do was either take it by force or destroy it. Shad arrived in his chambers and watched the beauty. He knew that she was not sleeping, so he asked her to stop pretending. Opening her eyes and smiling, the lady noticed that she had clashed with a monster in the past. And after that incident, sleep itself became lighter. It seemed that the lady was picky about where she slept, but it seems that traveling has made her less selective. The girl decided to clarify whether this information was really so interesting. She is constantly asked similar questions. He also heard that Nazir had come in just recently. It was impossible to hide the truth, because even so, Raccoon would eventually find out. The young man answered the question, simply stating that thanks to power, the people of Pisian did not live better. She decided to clarify whether this was true. The girl wanted to know more, but the man agreed to this only if she told about her childhood. The lady has her father's character and appearance, but many consider her to be similar to her mother. Of course, Asina loves both parents, but she just has some problems understanding her mother. Looking at Beihai, the lady became interested in what his parents looked like. She was sure that they were also extremely unusual. The young man calmly explained that he had never seen his mother. He was told that she died shortly after he was born. If the hero talks about his father, he couldn't say whether he was good or bad. There is no hint of emotion in his voice. He doesn't care. The people of Pisian are afraid that their ideal god will change. They don't need anyone else for the girl. Bedad looks like a lonely person. This morning, they reported that Cracia had made her first move and had set up a meeting with the Cromwell ambassador. They are putting a lot of effort into it. The country was once barren and poor, but thanks to the trading guilds, it finally managed to become rich. Turning to Nazir, the gentleman reported another piece of news. It turned out that Gedik was asking for an audience. The Grand Vizier must know that the king must not be disturbed unless he himself calls. The man has something on his mind, so he will find out when he meets him. Having seen the young man, he was glad that the gentleman had returned to the city after his trip. Usually, Ahmed likes Raccoon's absence the most, and this time he was caught out. The young man decided to really pick on them, but smiling, he offered to sit down and have some tea. They almost started interrogating Shad, but he stopped it. There are rumors that the new Ira may be a spy for Cromwell, and that is obviously what the vizier came to talk about. He himself would not have had the courage to challenge, which means that someone put him up to it. Most likely it was Warrain. Ahmed continued. He knew that the status of the women in the harem should not be questioned, but if there was a risk, it could not be missed. Everyone around is doing nothing but whispering the exact source of the rumors cannot be said, but there is still a good reason for suspicion. The blonde lowered his voice, asking if the man wanted to arrange a personal meeting with Ira. It even sounded crazy. Quickly coming to his senses, the hero declared that he wouldn't dare, but he wouldn't have to worry if a woman went to the meeting. Jakia will be sent as soon as possible. She will become a personal servant. Her father gave her the task of finding out who Ira is. The lady always dreamed of becoming a harem girl, so if anything happens, she could be next. The chief chamberlain has arrived to see Asina as well. She is not ready yet, but he would like to wait outside. For the people of Pision, the chambers in the palace of Shad are a holy place where their god sleeps, and he did not believe that a woman was locked in the room. The girl finally came out. She greeted them and asked why they wanted to see her from her appearance. You could tell that she was a beauty. Everything immediately fell into place. Iman introduced himself, saying that he managed the local palaces, including the main one where they were located. As the chief chamberlain, the young man came to ask if he could somehow help make the stay comfortable, nothing more. The girl was about to go and change her clothes, but before that, she asked how long they would keep her in the palace. She would like to return to the harem. Initially, the harem was completely closed. The question is very delicate, and it will not be possible to answer it. It is better to ask Sihad. Iman stared at the lady, simply amazed by the fact that the city would finally be able to acquire a mistress. Ira turned away. The man only thinks about how to destroy the girl. In fact, there is no talk of love. Sihad did not admit it. No guy would look at a woman with such enchanted eyes if he did not love her. The heroine tries to convince herself that, in reality, there is nothing like that. She cannot believe that someone fell in love with her. Ira froze as she remembered all their good moments. Iman chuckled. She wasn't very good at understanding men's feelings either. Nazir was informed that Jakia would now be a servant, and that Vareen was behind all of this, and by taking advantage of the situation, he would be able to gather more information. Umar raised an eyebrow. Asina should also be ready. After all, we are talking about Gedik's daughter. Sakun, since childhood, he cherished her, and this was beneficial to both her and her father. Thanks to his daughter, he acquired influential acquaintances and was able to rise. The young man decided to tell Ira about everything. He went along the corridors to his chambers. He had never been so lost before. There was no choice but to accept the fact that the woman in the room had raised a storm in his heart. Entering the room, the hero asked about the outfit. He was happy to be the first to see a lady in such attire. The young man was silent, and so the lady decided that it did not suit her. She was already about to leave, but stopping her, he said that she was beautiful. The girl did not want to stand in one place and listen to sweet words that were not true in any case. Everything was much better when the heroine was further away from the man. The warmth next to him makes you feel too much. Usually the lady does not react at all, but it seems that something has changed. Turning to the maid, he asked about the lady who visited in the morning. Iman was the one who came to the palace and seemed to say something the girl could not admit, say that perhaps the master loved her. The young man has no idea what the chamberlain said, but he will definitely get it, because he should not have even opened his mouth. The blonde decided to tell the story anyway. She asked about the harem, but she was not given the clear answer she asked for. The girl didn't want to ask something that would make the hero angry, but she still asked why the harem was closed. She assumed that Behi didn't like women. The young man is not sure that he is experiencing anything specific one day. He will have to get married, so this position is extremely strange. Asina asked such a question because she remembered that the king would sooner or later have to have an heir. The blonde grinned. It seemed to him that the maiden would be the last one to take care of something like that. Usually, this was the fate of assistants. There are many problems with women. When Rakun first ascended to the throne, Pision was devastated by war, and every inhabitant suffered from a constant lack of water and food. Problems piled up one on top of another, so there was no time left for entertainment. The hero reasoned absolutely calmly. Sooner or later, a man will have to produce an heir, and he will probably marry some sweet and gentle Pesyanka. The girl acted as if she was jealous, but when asked, she tried with all her might to assure him that this was not the case. She already lives with the most wonderful person who exists. The young man could not resist and pulled the girl closer to him. He could kiss her, but he knows that he will not be able to stop. The whole evening, the heroine thought about what had happened. She couldn't stop thinking, her feelings seemed to be trying to break out. Virgo believed that she shouldn't have provoked him, but everything still didn't end well. In the end, everything came to the point that the lady began to blame her father. Because of his strange appearance, her standards rose. Ira was distracted when someone entered. It was Jakia. She greeted formally, informing that she would be the new maid. The girl looked at the blonde and immediately noticed that her appearance was very different from what it was before. The girl began to behave like a child just to irritate the woman, but instead she noticed that the heroine was not at all familiar with palace etiquette. The day before, Shad had informed that the servant would be Ahmed and that she would be looking for something suspicious for the Grand Vizier. The heroine understood that for a northerner, everything that was happening in Pijian was reminiscent of something strange. The rules of the palace and the nobility were something else. She decided to take up etiquette training because, in her opinion, this is the best option to avoid embarrassment. The heroine didn't know how to react. There was a feeling that no would not be accepted as an answer. They would start with the basics of etiquette. Izmir arrived too late, realizing that Shad's place of honor was empty. He reported that they were attacked by bandits and had to teach them a lesson. Maine is the homeland of many skilled warriors. The locals organize battles in which they choose the strongest warrior who becomes their ruler. The chief chamberlain arrived on time. He would like to be nearby, but he is constantly with the master to serve him. For some reason, the conversation turned to the fact that the king was busy with something. Izmir had not been to Pijian for a long time, so he was not informed about what was happening. Ra Kun finally brought a woman to the palace, and a very beautiful one. At that, they saw no point in lying because they were telling the pure truth. Gedik's voice was heard from behind. He knew that the new Ira was a northerner. She was warmly received, although she could be a spy. Turning to the vizier, Iman chuckled, noticing that he was pushing his daughter too hard in his attempts to expose his mistress. Gedika will be given an audience, but for now he tactfully plans to run away so as not to be seen by anyone again. The great ruler Warrain was also nearby, because as soon as the vizier left, he immediately greeted those gathered. Turning to Izmir, the man also noted that they had not seen each other for a long time, which was almost unacceptable. He would like to see him in person, so he would send a servant later. For hours now, Ira had been studying books on palace etiquette. Jakia was exhausting her as best she could. The blonde's head began to hurt from constantly thinking about escaping, and on top of all this, she had to do her studies. When the girl's husband came to visit her in the evening, she began to complain to him about how she was being abused. Jakia decided not to change her manners. The vizier was definitely not very well in the head if he thought that Aira needed to be checked. "All the talk about the blonde being a spy is terrible," the young man asked, to be careful if the lady does not want to die. The hero was going to spare the girl. She nodded. One thing was clear, the man fell in love, and now he would do everything to make her happy. The blonde would like to understand what she feels, but she is not going to do it, no matter what she feels. Shad is not someone to get into a relationship with. Umar was right. If a lady doesn't have feelings, it's better to keep your distance. Asina understood that besides everything she was stabbing, the time had come to give birth to an heir. Her facial expression changed when the thought came to her mind. All sorts of sad thoughts creep in on their own, but the lady assured me that this was not connected with the young man. She did not want to tell the truth. Asina imagined the person she liked with another person, and that made her even more upset. Shad was surprised. He did not believe that a man lived with a lady and dated someone else. With a sad expression on his face, the young man asked why the girl stayed with someone who did not appreciate her. The heroine shouldn't laugh, but she still laughs, because she said earlier that she lives with her father. Technically, she didn't lie. He really is the most handsome in the world. Many say that the gentleman is the most wonderful, and especially his daughter thinks so, because she loves him with all her heart. Behai asked if he was more beautiful. It seemed like something like that shouldn't bother him, but everything turned upside down. Of course, a man can't help but know that he is attractive. The girl continued laughing. It was difficult for her to stop. Having thrown Lisha onto the bed, the young man assumed that she knew what the consequences of her ridicule would be. In the morning, Izmir arrived in the main hall and greeted Shad as expected. The young man had come all the way to be in the city. The gentleman heard about a clash with bandits. One of the warriors died, and if something is needed, the hero is ready to recognize the merits of the deceased. The hero enjoyed the banquet, but because he was gone for a long time, there were a lot of unfamiliar faces around. Many of the rulers he had known had been replaced by successors, and now everything had changed quite dramatically. The young man said that he also plans to leave his post. He is considering candidates. A duel will be organized next year to give way to the winner. Sihad hoped that Izmir would hold out a little longer, and he himself thought that it would be a little easier. Many rulers already have successors. The man also wanted to speed up. He has no one, so one can only hope. Among the 6 regions, Sohar is the most respected, and many grand viziers and officials have come from there. Unlike Sohar, people in Shars have closer relationships, but they do not get along with other regions. The man asked to beware of Warrain, and when he nodded, he decided to ask if Sihad was investigating the incident that happened many years ago. The young man shares the feelings of other people who are still grieving. He has not forgotten anything. Izmir also remembers everything. He still was not able to change anything. Then the third prince slaughtered all the women and children of the harem. Being a skilled warrior with a kind heart, the third prince was unofficially chosen as the next Kuni. One day he killed everyone and then fished himself after the death of the strongest candidate. The remaining members of the royal family started a war for the throne. That day, the boy's mother died in the harem, as did Mayna's sister. Unfortunately, they will never forget about it. The master is not saddened by death, because people can no longer be brought back. He wants to know what was in the mind of the past Kuni. Izmir is afraid that he will lose someone again, but they promise him that they will take care of everything. Once again, all day long, Jakia was telling Ira boring rules of etiquette. Sitting at the table, she even fell asleep. As a child, the maid spent some time in a harem, and therefore managed to learn quite a lot of details. When the girl lost her mother, she was sent to live in a castle with her aunt. The blonde wanted to know what happened. Instead of telling, the lady decided to continue the lesson. Ira decided to lighten the mood by asking to call her by name. The girl won't get anything from the acquaintance, but she wasn't looking for anything. She used her authority, saying that it was an order. Asina still wanted to know what duties Ira might have. It seemed to her that concubines usually did nothing. The girl decided not to ask any more questions. She remembered that Bahai had already said that it was not he who closed the harem. Jakia should have known what the past Sakun was like. She was close to him, so she should understand. The girl said that the man was a good man and a worthy ruler. He was special. The gentleman cared for Ahmed as if she were his own daughter. The kindness he showed was more than she deserved. It is strange that the man was not a good father to his son, but was courting someone else's daughter. It became interesting what kind of relationship Jakia has with Gedik. The blonde noticed how the expression on her face suddenly became stony, so she apologized if she had touched an old wound. It was worth sitting with the girl one-on-one. It turned out that she is calm and wise. She would be lying if she said that she is on good terms with her father. It seems that despite all the strife, the girl still loves him. This is evident from the way she speaks. Her voice is full of love. From the lady's naive assumption, it is clear that she grew up in a good family. People will not tolerate any of her antics. Jakia allowed them to talk to her like that because she was only a servant, but with others, such communication was unacceptable. Izmir lay in wait for Varane and began to question him as to whether it was really he, the man who sent the bandits away. There are quite a few bandits all over the country, but they don't travel in large groups, and they wouldn't attack without the support of someone influential. The brunette smiled, stating that he did not hold a grudge. The conclusion the ruler had made was rather some kind of misunderstanding. What was happening was outrageous, but there was no evidence, so Warren decided to cross the line and ask for help. Jakia explained that the rulers would kill the concubine. She was under Sihad's protection, but as soon as she lost his favor, everything would end. The girl assumed that even the maid would turn away from her, but she promised that this would not happen. Looking at the woman's behavior, the beauty began to understand why Sihad fell in love with her. The girl is beautiful. Asina is beautiful, but inside her soul she is dressed so simply, she should have tried even harder. The ruler came into the room and noticed that an interesting conversation about clothes was taking place there. Approaching Arabehi, immediately hugged her. The maids were looking at them, but it seemed like he didn't care at all. Turning to Jakia, The young man noted that he did not think that she would agree to such a job. The lady's eyes showed what she was thinking. She decided to leave so as not to disturb the couple, but in reality, she was just hurt in her soul. The girl likes Bedad, and she hides it very poorly. One can understand her, because such a wonderful person cannot help but be liked. Asina is glad that the guy's attention belongs only to her. She would like the moment to last forever. Since birth, the maiden has received an incredible amount of attention, and she is accustomed to being looked at with respectful awe. The look in the man's red eyes is different. They look at the heroine with a scorching lust that has never been seen before. Apparently, the lady was still attracted to the gentleman. He noticed that she blushed and began to ask what was going on. Perhaps the Virgo is uncomfortable being touched, but if so, he will not hug her against her will. He decided to change the subject by asking what Jakiya taught the heroine. They had rules of etiquette again, but this time different ones. While the two were talking, Karim ran into the room. They had problems because the ambassador and his companions were attacked in the desert. Ira was escorted to her quarters. It seemed they didn't want her to know all the details about the attack. The girl thought that the ambassador was from Cromwell, but it also seemed strange because they were enemies. On the table in the room, the lady found some paper. Picking it up, she froze in shock because the coat of arms of the Asna family was depicted on it. The messengers were trying to climb another mountain to cross the desert. One of them complained about the attackers. Pisian was never a peaceful place. Some were against friendly relations, but it seemed that they would not attack. The head of the Estati family, Ian Tyrann, listened as his assistant complained and wished to go back to Cromwell. They were attacked, but that doesn't mean everything will end well. In the midst of all the chaos, they could still be caught up with. On the one hand, the man was not the head of a great family. For nothing, he assumed that the best option would be to simply kill everyone. Ian looked at his watch every day as if it were his most precious treasure. But now it was broken. He said it was a gift from his niece. Peace negotiations should be forgotten. The assistant began to ask to calm down. After all, the damage is not serious. A resting place was prepared for the Knights of Cromwell right in the castle, but the envoys could not be found. They had fled somewhere. It doesn't seem like Warrain was involved in the dusting. The elders of Sharza were behind it. They originally had a large territory. The ruler keeps them under control, but no one knows what they are capable of. The country is still part of the Pisan Empire, so those who did this will answer for what happened. The messenger may be alive or already dead, but he must be found. The girl thought about that piece of paper with the coat of arms. Whether it was Yakaya herself or the person who gave it to her, the lady's identity was now known. The heroine always disguised herself, and it is unlikely that anyone during the journey could understand who she was. Posters with her image were hung only in the north. Behi came into the room again. He was supposed to be absent due to his busy schedule, but in the end, everything turned out exactly like that. The girl decided to ask about Jakiya. She couldn't say that she wanted to study her opponent, so she simply stated that she became interested. The boy explained that he was not raised in a harem. His mother fell ill, and he was sent to her parents' house. For some reason, she wanted desperately to drive him out of the harem. He and the girl have one thing in common. They are the only survivors of the tragedy. Having lost everything, Kun could not live normally, and Ahmed looked after him all the time, although what happened left its mark on her too. Finally, the blonde began to understand what had happened. The previous ruler was bedridden, and his heir had died. Other successors were fighting for the throne, which led to a war. It became clear what Akka was talking about. Sihad really rebuilt the country from scratch. This greatly impressed everyone who met the ruler. A lot of effort, money, and time was spent on the new Pisian. The girl wanted to know better, so she asked to ask another question. The vizier invited Warren to have tea with him. The supreme leader had been so busy lately that everything had turned upside down. Gedik did not understand what was going on in his interlocutor's head, but tried to remain calm. He asked if his daughter was of any use. Jakia's job is not that dangerous, so there is no need to worry. The lady does her job perfectly, and it was she who handed over the paper with the coat of arms from him. The woman did not understand what Vareen wanted from the mistress, but she carried out the order because he could not wait for a personal meeting with Asina. The Virgin decided to clarify whether it was true that the country had suffered so much that for 5 years Pisian had been a living hell. It was decided that the survivor of the Desert of Death would ascend to the throne. No one could live there, because there is not even an oasis there. The young man was still able to live there for 4 years and get out. The prince was his only blood brother since they had the same parents. During his childhood, the baby was observed from time to time. Later, it was found out that it was his relative. The man learned that his mother died during that tragedy. The young man thought that the woman died before he was born, but it turned out that this was all untrue. Behi seems to be very lonely, but he doesn't want to admit it. He never had such a feeling when he ruled over everyone. Everything changed after meeting Asina. The girl got used to people loving her, so she gave the same in return. Sitting at the table with Jakia, the lady was wondering how she should ask about that cloth with the coat of arms. She just couldn't find the right moment. On the contrary, the assistant's mind kept recalling the moment when the lady hugged Bedad, so she decided to find out directly what Asina thought about him. The girl did not know how to answer correctly. She knows that the young man is a good man. Nodding, Ahmed said that someone is waiting for the lady. The maiden was told that if Lisi saw the thing, she would immediately want to go, taking out the chest. The lady handed over a comb with a coat of arms. The green-eyed woman could not say who she was meeting with, so she simply took the mistress to the garden. She sent away all the maids. The girl was wondering who would come to her until she noticed Varen. They hadn't seen each other for quite some time. Having handed over the fabric, the heroine immediately asked if he had passed it on through Jakia, and a confident yes was heard. The ruler of Sharza was interested in what the ruler of 3 months had forgotten in Pisyan. He did not know how it was connected. Coming closer, the young man quietly asked. Clarifying, he let the heroine think for herself about what he wanted. When it was announced 15 years ago that the prince who survived the desert would become king, the elders gloated. It was believed that once all the successors disappeared, Sharza would become independent. But one man whom everyone feared returned, and this destroyed all dreams. The ruler of the country considers the king to be lucky, and even now this is true because he got a beautiful girl. The brunette wants cooperation from Asina, wants her to do everything she is told, and not to contradict. Arriving in an enemy country alone, the lady had to be prepared for the consequences. The man was directly threatening. He would not stop at simple murder if the plan failed. Taking advantage of the lady's status, the ruler could easily start another war, but the maiden tried to resist. To kill the blonde, he wouldn't even have to hire killers. He'd just have to reveal her identity and accuse her of espionage. He gave her time to make a decision. One of the leaders met the Knights of Cromwell. There was nothing out of the ordinary, but they were very worried about their master. They said that the young man would be fine next to Nazen. He is so skilled that anyone would envy him, and is even considered something like a fairy or a descendant of God. A message was delivered to the Lord Sihad, is too busy to come in person. Dodd recently disappeared, so he has other concerns. Karim, hearing the news, ran out quickly. His father was in danger, or rather, he went missing on the way to the capital. The messengers continued walking through the desert, but it seemed that nothing was visible, only endless sands. Ian looked around, but suddenly noticed a man who seemed to be being chased by bandits. He and Nizem decided to help. Astati reported that they had saved the stranger, as they themselves were going to Pisyan. They were messengers, and they too were attacked. Ian decided to find out the name of the person they met on the road, and it turned out that it was the ruler of Moscat, Deoday. Warrain was in his room when Akka came running to him, asking if his master knew that the elders were going to attack the messenger. Blue Eyes knew about everything, and even heard that the one who arrived from Cromwell was a big shot there. Duke Astatius was not to be underestimated, but Varen didn't understand what that had to do with him. The gentleman seemed not to understand the whole situation, and acted as if he didn't care how many times that week he started drinking. Akka quickly realized that the whole problem was in Asen. He wanted to ask something else, but the blue-eyed man did not want to continue the conversation. Last night, Ira couldn't sleep a wink. Varen was up to something, but it was almost impossible to read his thoughts. The maiden couldn't ask for help outside the palace. She was being watched. The maids noticed that something was wrong, so they asked if the girl was having nightmares. Sihad was busy all day and would not be able to visit her. Sitting in his office, the supreme ruler of Sharza once again felt only the boredom that had haunted him all his life. The duties as the son of the chief were not difficult, rather boring. The hero did not feel anything special due to the expectations placed on him. No matter what the man did or who he dated, the emptiness inside his heart never left him. He wanted the hole to disappear, no matter how. This continued until the chief met that lady. She was as if woven from moonlight. Then for the first time, he realized that a girl could be dazzling. The heroine was sitting by the window again and looking at the moon. It was beautiful as usual. Baydad came into the room. The maiden did not answer him. She was sorry, but she could not expose her family and country to danger. Still, the heroine couldn't do anything about her feelings. She hugged the man, saying that she missed him very much. The blonde kept wondering what had happened. Either the lady had decided to open her heart, or she had decided to say goodbye in this way. Having moved away, the heroine asked not to call her a kitten. She is a human, and such a nickname seemed a little strange to her until Asina decides to stay of her own free will, and until the emotions that are raging are understood. Nothing will change. Smiling, the young man suggested that he should now call his beloved his moon. The nickname sounded sweet. The girl does not understand what to do next. She cannot turn away from the young man and thereby stab him in the back. The heroine's only option left is to escape from Piscian so as not to cause any more problems. The lady does not know how to do this unnoticed and step over herself. Of all the territories, Sihal has the closest ties to central politics and is home to numerous families and elders. Neja works to maintain peace, while Muscat has less influence due to its remoteness, but produces excellent heroes. Jakia was telling Piscian's story. When she noticed that Asina was depressed again, she suggested that they go for a walk. The banquet had been going on for several days. Already, the heroine did not quite understand the meaning because Cromwell's envoy had recently disappeared. Nazir was asked if he trusts Ira, with whom he spends almost all his time. In fact, he understands that he has doubts. Shad is almost a god whom the whole nation has been waiting for a long time, and when he hesitates because of Asina, it becomes uneasy. The chamberlain was sure that the king would soon get tired of the lady anyway, but Nazir interrupted, saying that the gentleman had used his divine powers for her. When the lady returned back to her chambers, Iman was already there. He said that he just came to talk, but even so, he was lying. While the festival was going on, it was assumed that the maiden was bored, and they arranged a feast to thank Sihad for not abandoning his people. We are talking about a trip to Ismail. This place is located within Piscian, but no one knows the exact location. When a man goes on a trip, a drought and many other troubles come to the kingdom, and the inhabitants eagerly await the king's return. The lady didn't understand what all this was for. They did everything to keep Kun in Piscian, but the easiest one was to offer a woman. The girl was not stupid, so she understood the hint that she should stop getting under the king's feet. The woman had no intention of staying nearby. The conversation was unpleasant for her, just as it was for Iman himself. She didn't quite understand the point of treating Bihé like that he would never leave his country out of a sense of responsibility to the people. After the chamberlain's words, it seemed that the palace was like a prison. The lady also felt like an animal in a trap. Then she had problems. The heroine wanted to ask for a glass of water, but there was no one around. When she went outside, someone attacked from behind and grabbed her. While Sihad was working, Iman stood nearby and asked if he would like to go see Asina. It all seemed like a test. It was a presumptuous move on the part of the assistant. He should have regretted it. The brunette remained silent, but then said that it was easier to forget about the question since he had already received the answer. The servant bowed and left. Nazir recently offered to send a few people to the north and said that it would be easy to find out Asina's identity, but the young man refused. The blonde opened her eyes, realizing that her hands and feet were tied. She scolded herself for not seeing her attacker. When the bag was removed from his face, Varane appeared before his eyes. They were in one of the rooms of the harem, which was empty. The young man did not want to do exactly that, but the lady was the first to disown him. Earlier, the blonde refused to date him. For some reason, everything led to that night. When the moonlight illuminated the new hair color, the hero wanted to know why the lady changed her appearance. The blonde is not obliged to answer, but no one would trust someone who has a whole bunch of different secrets. The man asks to go to him. The situation is not such that he can refuse, but he also doesn't want to follow the instructions. The negative answer made the brunette freeze. This was the last chance for the lady at the next meeting. No one would beg her. The heroine's will is strong. Warren understood that he had to drive her into a corner, and make her feel in danger until she gave in and begged for salvation. The kidnapper brought Asina back to Sihad's chambers, where she was already met by Karim, who rudely asked where the lady had been. As soon as the blonde opened her mouth, the Tamir decided to leave. He did not hear a single truthful answer from her, so he will not trust her anymore. In the morning, I had to ask where the maids were. It turned out that they had been called away. The chamberlain said that they would be replaced. The man was hostile to Ira. Karim was probably called away by him too. The heroine began to understand more and more that no one can be trusted. Behdad also feels trapped in such an environment. The girl finally understood why she was thrown into prison. Back then, it had once hurt her greatly, but now everything had changed. Jakia is not in the best mood. She helped the lady get ready and remained quiet almost the whole time. Finally, the lady began to speak, and for some reason told the reason for her presence nearby. She was told that a snake had warmed itself next to Sahad. High Chief Warrain seems to be threatening the lady no matter what exactly, but it could also harm Sahad. Asina constantly gets in the way of the ruler. Ahmed offered to help him escape and return to the north. The day before the girl was asked to return home, her father said that when the work was done, he would tell everything. The lady knew what kind of men there were in her homeland. They never had enough land, so they constantly took it from others. The lady could not go against her father, but she wanted to help Sihad. The girl explained to Ayura that she only wanted to repay the previous Kun for his kindness by helping his son who was sitting at the throne. The blonde thought it didn't look like the heroine was lying, and this seemed like a great chance to finally break free. While the heroine continued to hesitate, Jakia took silence for consent, so she asked to start getting ready. At the same time, the envoys from Cromwell finally arrived in Pisyan. The city looked majestic, but at the same time dilapidated. Ian thought about his niece again, realizing that the girl would probably enjoy being in a place like this. The knight suggested going to the castle, but Dodd asked to stop considering that they were attacked, and something was happening there. Muscat himself decided to penetrate there and scout out the situation, so that later at night he could help the envoys get through. For now, he held out the seal of his country. If they presented it at the hotel, the travelers would be given better conditions. Karim arrived to Sihad and met Nazir there. He was clearly angry, but he arrived to talk to the ruler. The brunette came in and started saying from the doorway that Asina was a spy. At night, he saw her going out to talk to someone. Earlier, the chamberlain assigned a maid to the maid, and she stated that the mistress had met with Warrain. Nazir froze. He had his doubts about the lady, but he could not imagine that she would turn out to be a spy. 20 years ago, Kun learned that the third prince had met with his younger brother and asked him not to get attached to him. When the son was to become ruler, the rest would either have to be exiled or killed. The prince did not understand why his father had married so many women and revived so many children. They did not deserve to live until someone killed them. Karim talked to Nazir. The woman seemed suspicious from the very beginning, so her betrayal was not surprising. However, they were lucky that Sihad took the news well. Kun, who lives up to his rank, comes once in 1,000 years. The hero who is in his office asks the servant what Ira is doing. She is in her room. She has had problems sleeping in recent days. The man is glad that the lady is not sleeping peacefully. If that were the case, his blood would boil with intense anger. The girl easily fooled God. He was blinded by the tears and pitiful look of the beauty. Iman asked if the Lord was going to see the maiden. The king was on edge and started shouting, asking why his subordinate was doing this. The security of Sihad's palace wouldn't be so bad if a man took matters into his own hands. The chamberlain said that he did it on purpose, although he did not know that he would catch the lady at the scene of the crime. The young man seemed to be obsessed with the woman. Jakia was about to run away at dawn. The hero asked his assistant to arrive at dawn to call Warrain's. Blue-eyed learned that he had been summoned, which meant he understood that the gentleman had learned about the previous night. The young man noticed how Iman was watching the master. Now everyone had to hate Ayura. She would no longer receive love from Kuni. When the hero arrived for the conversation, he began to talk about how he knew that Sihad was absent from the feast for an important reason. The young man was summoned to answer for his actions. He will not make excuses, because he really did send the robbers. The hero thought that the interlocutor would make excuses, but he was too calm. Warren rose with the help of the elder's support. Therefore, if he turned away, he would immediately lose his power. The gentleman finally began to speak. The reflections were over. The punishment would be postponed until the ambassadors returned. The blonde continued, the ruler should take care of his health before interfering in other people's affairs. Until this day, the hero had not responded to any provocation, but something had changed. It seemed as if a warning had been given to stay away from the concubine. Near the exit, the gentleman was met by an assistant who asked him to watch his language because of Rakun's people. The brunette said that Ira was doing great. Very soon, they would have fireworks. The sky would glow with bright colors. From the very beginning, the girl realized that everything went wrong. When she arrived in the country, she offers herself options of what can be done. In the end, the heroine accepted Jakia's proposal. They were supposed to meet at night to leave the next day. The girl simply had no other choice. If she revealed her identity, it would only make the situation worse. Karim now looks at the lady with hostility, and Nazir seems disappointed. Shad did not come to see him even once. The lady is sorry that everything turned out this way. She really wants to see Rakun, but this will only make her even more pathetic. The maid called Asina, but said nothing. When she went out into the corridor, she saw a man standing in the distance. The girl did not sleep and looks tired, but she assures that the hero simply imagined it, and it is not so. It is unbearable to see the guy again. Even in such a situation, the lady wants to take his hands and smile. She wants to hug him. The girl knows that she must stop everything. They have no future, since their origin does not allow it. Standing in front of the woman, the hero wondered whether he should just kill her to make all the problems go away. Despite this, he had a strong feeling that if the girl was gone, an even greater hell awaited him. The gentleman knows very well that he cannot do any harm, and therefore he really wants to be told the whole truth. The girl lowered her head and said that she had nothing to tell. Nodding, the young man headed for the exit. Dodd arrived very soon and was met by Karim, who was incredibly happy that his father had not gone missing. The man was lucky people saved him, and he almost immediately went to Shad to talk to him. Moscato is in danger. Dara has smuggled a large quantity of weapons into Cracia. The border region is already devastated. There was no information about the deliveries. They said that they were only delivering food, but it seems that this was just a cover. Dara wants Moscata destroyed. They were enemies long before they were annexed by the Piesians. Jalil could make a decision, but it is not his decision. It is definitely a plan brought from Bahrain. Karim was the first to start worrying. The murderers of that country do not know satisfaction. As soon as they capture Muscat, they will move on. Dodd said he had another important message about the Reaper from Cromwell. He helped him get to Piziani. Evening came, and it was time to go to Yakia. The Tamer had run away in the morning, and a man arrived who would take her to the girl. On the way to the country in the desert, the master was attacked by unknown persons, and then messengers from Cromwell came to the rescue. One of them even carried the man on his back, because he understood that his wounds hurt. Dodd asked them not to worry about him, but they did not listen to him. The two stayed at an inn, and Karim was sent to the envoys to find out more, and then quietly lead them into the palace. The gentleman was so calm about everything that it was even frightening. Nazir was worried that he would be shocked because of Asina. But it seemed that everything was fine. The lady looked around the empty room for the last time. The one who had previously filled the space had simply left. Jakia pointed to the cart that was already ready. They were at the place that was intended for high-ranking officials. The lady looked at the outstretched hand. She understood that if she agreed, she would be able to let go of all the hardships that had tormented her for so long. The girl found it harder to breathe. She knew that, in the future, if she remembered Bechdad, it would mean nothing to her. Finally, the lady began to understand that she could not leave everything. Just like that, she asked for forgiveness from Jakia. She was sorry that everything turned out this way. When Ahmed was younger, she confessed her feelings to Shad. He told her to stop, but she couldn't, and later confessed again there was no place for her in his heart. But it was easy to find one for Asina. The maiden was eager to get back to her chambers. She knew that if she ignored the fact that Behi was dangerous, she would regret it greatly. Shad was already in the room. It didn't take long to realize that Asina had escaped, distracted by the chaos in the castle. The young man didn't realize that someone was missing until it was too late. The sad truth that the young man encountered in the empty room made his soul and heart freeze. Until this moment, the hero had never experienced such melancholy. He lived, and that was enough. After meeting Lisi, it became warm, and pure emotions appeared. The gentleman thought that he could tame the lady until she told the truth. But in the end, he himself was tamed. The young man began to think about how to return the lady, at least her body, because he would be able to win her heart later. Footsteps distracted her from her thoughts. The girl returned. She was going to run away, but for some reason she couldn't. The blonde hugged his beloved. As long as he had this warmth, it seemed like everything should be fine. Stepping back, the beauty insistently said that she wanted to tell him something important about her personality. The girl asked not to tell anyone, and said that her last name was de Velden. She was the only princess of Cromwell. The man arrived to apologize for the inconvenience he had caused the envoy. Ian, smiling nervously, asked when he could enter the castle. The escorts from Cromwell will arrive in Pision. Soon Karim reported that it will be possible to enter with them. The girl woke up and realized that Behi was not there, just like the maids. The young man was willing to wait as long as it took, just so that de Velden would trust him. Something was found on the wrist, and upon looking, the lady realized that it was a beautiful bracelet that was put on her. The beauty of the piece was so mesmerizing that it could have hypnotized you if you continued looking. Noor returned to the estate. She heard that, because of the lady and her request, freedom was granted, so the first thing she does is thank. The heroine didn't want to impose herself from the moment she returned, but she wanted to ask something. It was more of a favor. Karim brought envoys, although he was told to expect the arrival of knights from Cromwell. Ian declared that one person would be enough, and hurried to Shad. Entering the room, he greeted the gentleman. His Majesty ordered the treasures to be handed over to Ra Kun, but they were unable to deliver them, because during the journey, the travelers were attacked. Astatia easily expresses displeasure at being ambushed. Smiling, the blonde says that he is glad that they still arrived safely. The Duke holds a high position in his kingdom. He has a cute face, but there is no doubt that he is an imposing figure. When the conversation ended, the two went to their quarters to rest. Nizan understood why everyone was talking about Pision. There was simply a city there with a powerful ruler. They had a strange impression of the gentleman. He was somehow different from everyone else in the room. Ian was surprised by the overwhelming presence and would not have said that there was a person in front of them. The man has a power similar to magic. It was not clear from afar, but most likely the abilities are related to water. When the lady asked Noor for a favor, she wanted to know about all the internal affairs of the palace. The heroine was asked why, and she made a drama. She doesn't know anyone in Pision. However, when the new era comes, the situation will be even more under threat. After the lady decided to stay in Pision a little longer, her confused thoughts began to clear up. Jakia left the palace to seek refuge. The vizier was very greedy, and if a man like him sent his daughter away to use her, he was clearly up to something. The heroine wanted to find a solution. She had knowledge about the northern continent that the locals did not have. On the way to the castle, the maiden ran into Warain. It seemed to him that the lady should run away. Lady Jakia's movements were clear as day, so everything was known in advance. Bending down, the blue-eyed man asked why the beauty stayed. He knows that she had no reason to do so. Virgo decided to become Ira for Kun, but a man who has everything cannot be content with one lady. The mysterious aura that the hero felt around the lady disappeared, but she still attracted him. The brunette wasn't going to tell them what he wanted, because no one would listen to him anyway. It was as if he was playing some kind of game. Threats no longer worked on Asna, but Warain was not sure that Sihad really trusted her as she thought. Very soon, de Velden will be convinced that Bedad is not worth trusting, even if he now seems good and attentive. A rough voice was heard from behind, calling his name. Sihad ordered the ruler to leave. They had nothing to talk about in any case. The girl almost begged to be believed. She did not want to seem suspicious. The maid was not nearby either, because she had been sent on an errand. The blonde was the one who put Noor back with Ira. He thought that, if there was someone nearby, with whom she could get closer, it would be easier to settle in. Every time a lady sees a tender attitude, she does not understand what to do. Her thoughts are a little confused. Having decided to start a different conversation, the hero said that tomorrow, a feast would be held in honor of the envoy from Cromwell, and he would like to see Asina there too. Virgo does not want hostility between the two countries, so she will watch from the side and understand whether the messenger has arrived with good intentions or not. So that she is not revealed, her face will be covered with yashmak. Still, he had to agree, and stroking the girl on the head, Behdad promised that he would return in the morning. Devildan fell under his influence again. The two got ready and headed to the meeting place, Nizan asking questions, because he still didn't understand why the emperor was trying to improve relations with Pizian. Astatea didn't understand either. He didn't care about the relationship as long as there was no war. The land has a strange energy. It all seems far-fetched, but it feels like something is desperately trying to save the lands of Pizian. Asina had been getting ready since the morning to finally go to the feast. Bahai came into the room and greeted her with a smile. The lady asked his opinion about her outfit. Surely he could fall in love with her again. Having joked about his insecurity, the man laughed when the girl seemed offended. In fact, she looks wonderful. He is glad that the lady's face will be covered in front of strangers. Only he should look at her beauty. The woman seemed to be constantly glowing. The hero would like to take her and hide her, so that only he could admire her. No one else, for some reason, he became confident that Warren thought exactly the same. The master will not be able to achieve his goal, even if he has big plans for it. The ruler will not allow it, looking into Ira's eyes. Bahai assured that no one will hurt her as long as she is next to him. She will be protected. All the necessary people had already gathered in the hall. Lord Vika had not yet arrived. Nazir was worried, because given his advanced age, and what he had said before, it was impossible to feel worried. All this was extremely strange. Just recently, the gentleman said that he needed to convey something to Sihad, but only in person, not when there were other people around. It was probably related to his fast, or some other details. The High Chief of Sharza was the first to approach the arriving envoys to greet them. Akka warned the man not to joke with the Duke, as it could turn out very badly. The young man turned out to be much younger than Varen, thought there was a strange aura around him. The hero looked very similar to Develdan. I would like to ask him directly, but it was already clear that nothing would come of it. Finally, Sihad's arrival was announced. The main doors opened, the gentleman entered arm in arm with his Ira. When the girl sat down in the place behind the throne, she finally met the eyes of the envoy. In horror, she realized that her uncle was sitting there. The blonde foolishly hoped that she was not recognized. A conversation began. Ian said that he was quite comfortably settled and even had a good rest. The king was glad to hear this because the banquet was organized in honor of those who arrived. The green-eyed man nodded, but he himself began to think, not understanding why Asina ended up in Pizian. They wanted to ask Iman, who was standing nearby, about something. The blonde wanted to know who the woman sitting behind the gentleman was. The chamberlain explained that the blonde was the new era, or to be more clear, she was Kuhn's beloved woman. The brunette asked if the envoy knew her, and he just waved it off. He was simply surprised to see a northerner in the south. More and more unpleasant thoughts crept into his head. The young man could not take off how his niece could take such a post. He wanted to take Asina immediately, but they were not in the north, and without knowing the situation, he could not do anything. Nizan also saw the girl and began to ask the Duke in surprise what he was going to do about it. He decided that it would be better to think everything over. When the feast came to an end, the lady went to her chambers to get ready for bed. Initially, the blonde was surprised that Cromwell had sent an envoy at all, but the situation became even worse when it turned out that Ian was there of all the aristocrats. It was him. The king knew what he was doing when he sent the best of the best. The beauty understood that she should first check everything, and after she was sure make plans, she told Noor that she would be leaving. She did not immediately understand because it was already dark and dangerous outside. Considering the escapes that were always happening, the lady could not blame the maid for her mistrust. So she asked to just leave her for a while. She needed to be alone, nothing more smiling. She tried to somehow change the situation. The maids asked to call if anything was needed. The woman closed the door tighter and went to the window. She ordered whoever was hiding there to show themselves. Nizan came down onto the windowsill and immediately waved his hand. He and the heroine hadn't seen each other for a long time. It was nice to finally meet after such a breakup. The girl said that she had her own reasons for coming to Pizian. He offers to go because Ian is already waiting. The blonde shrugged her shoulders because the glass was closed. The young man grinned and asked to wait. He leaned over sharply and broke the window glass. Horror appeared on Asina's face, and immediately the screams of the maids were heard, who began to call the lady, not understanding what kind of noise was in her room. The blonde took advantage of the moment they should have run quickly, so that nothing happened, because then they could have been seen. The heroine could not believe that she was behaving like this. She knew that later she would have big troubles. To avoid this, she stopped abruptly. De Velden is indeed happy to see her uncle and the knight after a long time, but she has her own reasons for staying in the manor instead of going with them. The lady asked to carefully convey the news to Astatius, as if he did not know his niece. Nizen shrugged. They both knew who Ian was, and he would most likely be furious or even upset if he was told such a thing. Behind the door, screams and questions were heard as to why Asina was not opening the door. She decided to send the blonde away, but at the end, he gave her a small thing. It was a family heirloom that only the head of the family, the Duke, possessed. It was a symbol of the one who protects. The girl was given it out of good wishes. When it was all over, the hero ran back to the room where he and the gentleman lived in a split second. Of course, the uncle didn't believe him and started asking what Asina had managed to do during his absence. His niece never sat still and got into some kind of trouble again, which was expected. The blonde knew the princess's usual behavior and understood that what was happening would not improve, everything would only get worse. He still did not understand how the lady got mixed up with the king of a hostile state, which was also located in the south. Pision is not a place where you can be calm. No matter what happens, Asina will never reveal her identity for fear of casting a shadow of shame on her great family, unless she is in an unfamiliar place. For some reason, it only means that she is trying to figure things out on her own. She can do a lot on her own. Moreover, Pision is not in the best position now. Ian thought for a long time and decided to first listen to the beauty's version of events. Iman almost immediately reported to Shad that someone had broken into Ira's bedroom. The heroine was escorted to the harem so that she would be safe there. Asina said that the window had broken from the wind. This is literally but the most unrealistic reason. Karim arrived in the room. He asked for forgiveness for interrupting Shad. The gentleman had to give him permission to go to Muscat. Not understanding the reason, the blonde asked a few leading questions. The knight received news that was not the best. He received news that the situation in his home country was getting worse every day. The temporary leader, Jalil, had returned to Dara. A war was about to break out between the two clans. His wounded father could not participate in the battle. The young man must go to his homeland and prepare for battle. It will be difficult, one can only imagine, be it weapons or the number of soldiers. The chances of victory will not be in Dara's favor. Kun usually does not interfere in clan disputes, but this is necessary to maintain Pision's position in the far west. As a warning, the master asked to send tamers. Iman froze. It could be dangerous. Raum had already left for Sharza to investigate the truth behind the attack on the envoy. If the other warriors left the city, only 5 squads would remain. The blonde nodded. He understood what the assistant meant, but he also knew that they had no right to give up Muscat, and without help, they would definitely capture it. The most important thing was to maintain the balance in the country so that it would not fall apart again. The girl walked around the palace, enjoying the pleasant air after the feast. She still had no chance to talk to Bihai. The man was very busy all the time, and Asina was also distracted by Ian and this whole problem with talking. The lady put a neat earring on her ear. She took the thing, but did not understand what the point was, because she had already entered the harem a long time ago. And now that the heroine knows about the master's past, the place also looks completely different. Having examined the harem on her own, the lady did not understand why there was such a past here. She could not believe that the third prince really killed all the people who once lived on the territory. The moon was shining very brightly again. It was noticeable and pleasant. The girl looked at the sky and did not notice how a man landed next to her. Ian smiled immediately, asking what his niece was doing in Pision. They had not seen each other for a very long time, so the heroine almost immediately hugged her uncle, still not answering the question. Asina pulled away and immediately began to reproach him. She asked him to pretend that the man didn't know her, but he didn't listen. After all, he liked the idea of sneaking in secretly, so that no one would see. After all, this could have been enough to catch him, but nothing happened. Astatia wanted to know the reason all this time. The lady remained silent, not revealing her secrets. She avoids her family, and at the same time continues to lie, pretending that she arrived in the enemy country just for rest. Although this is not at all the case. The smile was still on her face, but at the same time, Asina felt the terrible pressure of the Duke. He directly asked how she became Kun's beloved woman. The blonde froze and nodded slightly, but didn't know how to explain everything. The story turned out to be too long, and the young man didn't ask questions about it, but decided to ask what the woman was going to do next. Asina started screaming that she had only come to find out something, telling her uncle that she had fallen in love with the king of a hostile state would be almost fatal. He should not know the whole truth, so she had to lie again. In any case, Ian would have to leave sooner or later, just to avoid making the girl doubt all of this. Asina still couldn't tell him about her reasons for being in the harem. In the midst of the conversation, Sihad's menacing voice was heard. He came out of the corridor, asking what was going on. The girl tried to explain that she didn't mean anything, but they didn't listen to her, but grabbed her by the hand and dragged her to the exit. The girl did not understand where they were taking her and what to do next. Leaving the girl behind the column, the blonde man in a menacing voice noted that the girl almost always finds a way to exceed the man's expectations each time she throws out some new trick. The day before, they had broken into the house, so the chief was very worried. What the hero had encountered made him feel afraid. Coming out of the shadows, he watched as his woman ran towards someone else, shouting joyfully that they had not seen each other for a long time. The young man had a vague idea of what had happened. He still didn't know the woman's full story before they met. Even when the lady was in his arms, he couldn't stop being nervous, not knowing at what moment it would all disappear. The hero had no one who was dear to him, but unlike him, the beauty had many close people in the north. The gentle look and relaxed movements in the company of that man proved this, once again making her believe in reality. When the woman said that she would stay in the country, only to find out something, the hero felt pain in his chest. He believed that the lady was finally in his arms, but he was mistaken. He decided to show how long he had restrained himself in the company of his beloved. The girl felt that she couldn't breathe. Because of the persistent kiss, all the emotions were transmitted through the lips and tongue. He was trying to say something. It seemed to become clear what was meant, having let go. The young man would no longer be able to stop. But nevertheless, this is not considered right. Someone is coming towards them, so they have to stop. Ian appeared in the corridor. They shouted at him that he had no right to enter the harem. The hero came because he felt the need. Holding out his hand, he ordered Asina to come to him so that everything would be fine and she would be safe. Sihad rudely asked who Astatia was to interfere in the affairs of a couple. He assumed that the man was the woman's lover, but he, without thinking twice, declared that Asina, who was standing to the side, was his precious niece, and a deathly silence hung in the corridor. Quickly to fix the situation, the lady asked to calm down and listen to her. After the uncle heard the whole situation in the morning, he wanted to know even more and was furious about what was happening. It just did not fit in his head. The young man had no intention of helping the girl and even refused to give her money. He sat down and exhaled with displeasure because he didn't know what to do in such a situation. Ian is the Grand Duke, the one who was close to the girl. Although he is the younger brother of Mother Asina, he is not much older than his niece, so they grew up like brother and sister. They developed a special relationship that could not be broken. Nizan, who approached the gentleman, asked what they were going to do next. The whole situation had become complicated, and this was rather an understatement. The blonde said that he needed to go and sort everything out before it was too late. Getting up from his seat, the Duke announced that he intended to go and resolve the problem with the King of Pizian. He knew that he had no choice in any case since he could not leave his niece alone in an enemy country. The table was set in the office. Behind the gentleman stood Nazir, who had to be present according to the law, sitting there. Sihad began to understand more now that he looked at Astatia. He understood that they were somewhat similar in appearance and behavior. Having put down his cup of tea, the hero began a conversation to begin with. He decided to tell a little about the De Velden family. Of course, he did not want to go into all the details, but still he could not leave the situation to its own devices. Many people know that Ashina's father is the Grand Duke Weldon, and also the younger brother of the emperor, who rules he renounced his right to the throne, but is still effectively a member of the royal family. The man's sister, the duke's second daughter, married the young man, and she also, in place of the late empress, raised the princess. They had an only daughter whom they cherished and loved with all their hearts. Not long ago, one piece of news became known that made one doubt the reality. The emperor's only child Aziz refused the right to inherit the throne. As a result, the first in line to the throne of Cromwell is Asina. The girl herself is not yet aware of her power and what is happening. She still has to learn more, and then the decision will remain hers. But Ian could not allow the fact that the lady remained on the territory of an enemy state. Shad took Cromwell's precious heir, locked her up without sufficient grounds, and placed her in the harem, making her the king's woman. The hero must understand that this is a serious diplomatic violation. It seemed as if the duke began to threaten. The green-eyed man finished the story by saying that all this could lead to war again. He feels a huge, frightening pressure from the king. It is terrible. It is unpleasant to be near him. There are no threats. Pision is already involved in internal affairs. It is true that Asina was the first to act suspiciously enough. It is not surprising that she was locked up and made to doubt her origin, which she did not reveal. Shad still did not understand how such a respected lady could travel alone, putting herself in danger. Everyone in the family tried to stop her. Even her mother locked the girl in the room, but nothing helped after spending time together. The gentleman should understand that it is difficult to break a lady. She does not listen to anyone. There is probably no reason why women cannot have fun, socialize, and live for their husbands and children. Even though life is not bad, it does not suit Asina. She always wanted something more. The whole family cares about the baby's happiness, so they wanted to let her live in a way that makes her shine brightly. She deserves to only meet joys and moments along the way that make her smile even more. Having exhaled, the gentleman decided to start talking about a compromise. He did not quite understand what the duke wanted from him. It seemed that the duke himself had not yet decided, so he took a pause to formulate a proposal. That same day, a squad of knights arrived, bringing with them a lot of riches. They accidentally separated from Yen in the desert, but eventually found their way back, which was incredibly gratifying. Nizen, just like the master, changed back into their comfortable clothes, which they were used to. They greeted the arrivals, rejoicing that finally everything was over. The knights approached and did not immediately understand what kind of lady was nearby. Asina smiled awkwardly, waved her hand and greeted chaos. Immediately began those gathered, could not imagine that they would see the lady in such a place. They wanted to know what de Velden was doing in Pision, an enemy country. Ian appeared behind them, ordering everyone to move away, and not get in the way. Nazir came as an escort and stood to the side. The blonde started a conversation. Only the knights could remain calm after losing the person they were supposed to protect. The duke explained that Asina had joined them by chance. It just happened that way. He ordered the squad that upon returning home, they should not talk about it. And immediately there was agreement which came from all sides. The captain of the Green Knights, Mikkel, came forward. He decided to joke a little, asked if the master had enjoyed his rest alone while they were wandering. Nazir froze in horror, thinking that now a massacre would begin as punishment. Blue Eyes had heard that Cromwell was freer and had more space for ordinary people than Pision, but he hadn't expected it to be so good they could openly joke or express dissatisfaction. In his head, the man imagined what would happen if the soldiers of the South spoke to Karim in this way. No one ever allowed themselves to do such a thing, because everyone knew how harsh the Tamer was. He would surely make them fall to their knees and apologize. Ian sighed in disappointment. He couldn't believe that the knights hadn't been taught manners, and now they were behaving like this. The squad began to demand liquor as a reward because they were thirsty. The road had been hard, and they didn't mind a rest. The young man decided to speak first, because he was standing next to a beauty he had heard about the relationship between the lady and the envoy. After these words, there was silence. Something happened again, and Nazir still did not want to talk to the girl. With her eyes downcast, the girl asked to keep her identity a secret. She lied that she was not from Cromwell, and as a result, there was a misunderstanding, something she did not want. Most importantly, she understands that she did not want to harm anyone. The hero nodded. He couldn't control himself, in the end. He understood everything the lady must have wanted to avoid the shame that could fall on the country and family. The girl just wanted to protect herself and everyone else. Messenger Yen spoke with Shad. They arranged a meeting and drank for hours discussing what was happening. The king said that he would make amends when he heard the truth. In turn, the man demanded that everything that happened to Asuna in Pision be forgotten forever. Uncle hoped that the girl would not become a bone of contention. Nazir continued. He understands why the lady did not reveal her identity when even her life directly depended on it. The heroine's family actually loves and cares for her the most. There was silence again until the young man began to speak again after the messenger's intervention. It seemed that the problem between them had finally been settled. Before that, they had not been able to talk so calmly. If so, the hero wanted to know if Asina would leave Pizian. It was hard to believe that the end of the great journey had come. The girl herself did not understand what was happening. She could not understand whether she was really going to leave. There were too many questions in her head. Virgo remembers the last months. She didn't want to end her relationship with Bedad like this. So she came back, instead of leaving and regretting the endless days. She wanted to cope with her situation as best as possible. But everything turned upside down. Now that Ian has arrived, it will be necessary to return to Cromwell. Even if it weren't for her uncle, the girl would definitely return to her state. One day, her family and friends are there, as well as the house that she could not leave. Nazir nodded. He had long ago realized that the girl was not one of those who liked to sit in one place. Lady Asina was right in what she said, but perhaps it would be more difficult for her, because it was already too late. At the same time, Warrain was preparing to carry out his plan. The arrow had already been released. Pision will soon be plunged into ruin, and there will be nothing. The master has information that Dodd is in the palace. It is finally time for another ruler to act. He knows that he will wipe Muscat off the face of the earth. The main leader also decided to go. He has his own task, and if he does not complete the mission, their plan will not be fulfilled. They got ready and went. There is not much time left. They need to think about what to do next. In the morning, Dodd came to Shad. He was worried and looked like he had learned something terrible. He had heard that Jalil had recently returned to Dara. The war had finally begun. They would not wait any longer. The blonde nodded. He would allow the Tamirs to help him in the country. The hero does not trust one of the rulers, even if he really wanted to. Because of the support of Varane, it will be difficult to cope alone. It was already clear the Tamers will help stop the warriors. They are not specially trained for battles in the desert. The young man asked if Dodd wanted to take Karim with him. He confidently refused. It was better for his son to remain safe in the main city. A new residence had been prepared for Asina. Although Ian said that he had settled everything, his heart was still heavy. The girl began to understand more and more that if she returned back to Cromwell, she would never see Bihi again. This thought ate her up gradually, and more, she told herself many times that they could not be together. Even when the heroine remembers the man's face, everything seems to be in a fog. No matter how many times the blonde tried to get the guy out of her head, she just couldn't. As she was passing by, the lady stopped because she saw something interesting. Noor immediately explained that in front of them was a fresco depicting the myth of the founding of the empire. The heroine heard that a man named Sihad Kun brought water to the arid lands of Pision and turned them into abundant ones. Next to the head, there is a small boy with white hair. He seems familiar. Besides the two, the fresco depicted the ruler's woman. Once upon a time, she led Sharza listening. The lady suddenly thought she noticed that it was too quiet around. This was not Sihad's palace or his harem, so it was strange that the servants were not visible at all. The heroine had a feeling that something was wrong again. Asina grabbed Noor by the hand so that they could run away quickly, and had already opened the door, but did not notice that Varine was standing there, his eyes glowing with a crazy light, one that did not bode well.